Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, July 26th, and we're about a week and a half away from Notre Dame players and coaches reporting and getting ready for fall camp. So it is an exciting time of the year. I'm Brian Driscoll. I'm the publisher at irishbreakdown.com. And Vince Dodere will be with us very shortly. He is handling some things right now, but we're going to go ahead and dive into today's topic. We're going to do a topic today. We believe we're in position to do a football 101 after we are done with that topic. But today we're going to talk about the Notre Dame offense. And the premise that we have basically with this conversation is when you look at Notre Dame, the defense is there. I think most of us would agree that the defense is there. The defense is where it needs to be for Notre Dame to be a championship caliber team. I would even argue that in the games that Notre Dame has played in the postseason, for the most part, now this year wasn't quite as good, but when you look at obviously LSU in recent years, but then of course Clemson in 2018, I think was a good example of that. I think that Notre Dame is in a position where, you know, their offense or their defense has been good. I mean, they battled Clemson. Even the points they gave up in 2018, they battled. And they made Clemson work for everything that they got. And so I think you're in a situation where the defense is where it needs to be. And now it's up to the offense to get up to speed. And when you look at where the defense is, you know, we could maybe contend that there's a couple little things here and there. I would say that there are areas they need to get better. A little bit more consistent in producing negatives, whether it be tackles for loss, sacks, and turnovers. I think handling mobile quarterbacks a little bit better maybe than they have in recent seasons. Again, maybe a little bit more disruptive at the quarterback. There's some areas where they can get better scheme-wise. There's certainly some areas where they can continue to improve from a talent standpoint. But from a production standpoint, for the most part, they've been there. And with Marcus Freeman now in charge, my optimism is at the very least they're going to stay where they've been. I think there's a good chance they're going to get even better, not just from a scheme and coaching standpoint, but also from a talent standpoint. So I view it as a situation where defense is where it's need to be. Now, where's the offense? This past year, Notre Dame's offense averaged 33.4 points per game. They were 36.1 the year before that against last 2 years, pretty mediocre schedules. They were around 34.2 back in 2017. They were around 31 in 2018, but that was misleading because they were close to 37 in the regular season in games Ian Book started, or I should say in games since when Ian Book took over, if you include also the 42 points that they scored with Brandon Wimbush, a quarterback, against Florida State. They were around 37 points per game, which is good. It's getting closer, but again, as we saw in the postseason, we saw in the big games when the defenses were better, the offense struggled to score. And that really continues to be the problem. When you look at the teams winning championships, right? Because isn't that always the goal? Is compete and win championships. You look at Alabama this past year. So Notre Dame, 33.4 points per game, 448.5 yards per game this past year, 6.2 yards per play. You look at the last three national champions. They averaged 40. This is going to be Bama, LSU, Clemson. 48.5 points per game, 48.4 points per game, 44.3 points per game. That's over 10 points each. 541.6 yards per game, 568.4 yards per game, 527.2 yards per game. At least 80 per team. Two of those teams were over 100 yards more than Notre Dame. Notre Dame, 6.2 yards per play. The last three champs were 7.8, 7.9, and 7.4. So clearly there's a gap, a big gap there between what Notre Dame has been on offense and what those teams have been on offense. Now, I don't believe Notre Dame has to score 44 to 49 points a game to be a championship football team. It's not so much about that end result. It's not so much, hey, Notre Dame goes out and scores 44 points next year and all of a sudden, hey, they're there, they're going to win a title. That's not what I'm saying. It's about becoming a more explosive and efficient offense. And that's something you've heard me say time and time again. And they have to be more explosive, more efficient. The encouraging thing for me was in a recent interview with Tommy Rees, I'm going to play that for you here in a second. He basically said it. He used a different term, but he said it. And I want to play that interview for you. And then we're going to talk about what that would look like. So we talk about the need for Notre Dame to be here. But today's show, we're going to talk about what that looks like. What exactly is an explosive and an efficient offense? What does that look like? And how can Notre Dame get there? So I'm going to play this interview from Coach Reese, and then we'll dive into it even more. I want to say, let's fast forward past the season, past the postseason, and look back on this offense. How are you hoping that you and other people define your offense? What are the characteristics? What are the traits that you hope people look back and say, the Notre Dame offense was this? Not schematic, hey, they were great at outside zone, but just what is going to be the identity of this team from just a bigger picture standpoint that's going to lead to, a successful season?
Yeah, I think the first word that comes to mind is aggressive. And that's really what I want to be able to hang our hat on. Look, and to back that up, I value efficiency, right? That's something that I value in offensive football, and I value in the game. Is like, how efficient can we be to string good plays after another? Okay, but for me to take a step back, it's how can we be aggressive yet efficient at the same time? And really, the thing I keep coming back to is it's on me to make sure that the quarterbacks understand the balance there. Because if I can call it in a way that's aggressive, but they can make the right decision, then we can still be efficient yet aggressive. And so, look, we all know what's out there. We all know, what the narrative is and what people say and where we need to improve and where we need to continue to be good. But at the end of the day, our duty is to win football games, and our duty is to put our team in position to win football games and to play offensive football at a level that allows us to win games. So we're never going to do things just because we're worried about the noise. But I do think that with conversations I've had with other coaches, with just some of the stuff I've read or some of the things that I've been able to take a step back from and really study my own habits and where we're at as an offensive staff, like the area where I want to improve and continue to strive to be is aggressive. And how can we always coach to not to lose the game, but to go win the game? And that's something that when we look back after this year, if I can say, hey, I did that, then I'll feel pretty good about where we're at.
So that's those are comments from Tommy Reese in a recent interview with Irish Breakdown. And, as Vince D'Addario joins us, our football analyst joins us, Vince, to me, there was a lot of things that he said in that interview that were music to my ears. And in that particular part, the thing that concerns me about this Notre Dame offense is, are they going to be saying things that, hey, look, we're fine. We just got to get a little bit better here, a little bit better there, kind of like what Brian Kelly said after 2015. And Coach Reese kind of started to go down that road, or at least I thought he was going to go down that road. And then he didn't. And he started talking about how, like, look, our job is to win the game. And I thought that's when he was going to start talking about, so we did enough to win games and that's all that matters. But he said, but at the same time, and then he kind of got into the fact that, there is this need to be explosive and efficient. And that was kind of good to hear. And then to hear him talk about how a big part of that is the quarterback being able to execute things, obviously was part of it. That's certainly going to be a huge part of it. But there's certain things that we've seen from this offense, or haven't seen from this offense, I should say, that we need to see from this offense if they're going to, in fact, be a more explosive unit. And he talked about the term aggressive. And I think aggressive creates an even greater – there's a reason I say explosive and not aggressive. And from conversations I've had with Coach Reese, what he means by that is what we refer to as explosive. So we're going to continue to use it, because I think when people think aggressive, Vince, they think big shots.
Yes,
take shots
down the field,
right.
It's the big play down
Trick
the
plays,
field
right?
Thing. Yeah, that's what aggressive means. Yeah.
Now, is that a part of being explosive?
Absolutely. Yes.
Is it the end all be all? No. And in the conversation we're about to have, it's, I'd say at best, third most important. Now, it's an important piece, but let's dive into this, Vince. And we kind of talked a little bit about, Vince and I before the show, about what we feel an explosive offense needs to be. And this comes from watching teams that are doing it, not just recently, but throughout history. What are those teams do? What you're not going to hear us do is talk about they got to average X number of yards per game rushing. They got to average number of yards passing, right? Oklahoma and Ohio State's total yards and points are going to look very similar to what Clemson and Alabama did the last couple of years, and LSU. But their rushing yards are going to look a whole lot different. For example, in 2019, LSU won the national title, averaging 48.4 points per game, averaging 166.8 rushing yards per game. In 2018, Clemson won the national title, averaging over 44 points a game, and that includes only scoring 30 against Notre Dame, right, which dragged their average down. And then they did it with 7.5 yards per play, and they did it with 248.2 rushing yards per game. Only 279 passing yards per game compared to 401.6 for LSU. That's not explosive, right? That's not what we're talking about. It can look a lot of different ways, but there are ingredients that go into all those offenses, whether you're talking about run, pass, all those kind of things. And that's what we want to dive into, Vince. In the first one, and again, this is going to build on each other, right? But the first one to me is tempo. And Vince, explain kind of what we mean by tempo. Why tempo is important. Why tempo is important, but also what tempo is not, so that people understand what we are referring to when we say you need to be able to play with tempo offensively.
So we are not referring. I'll start with that part first. We are not referring to hustling to the line and getting a playoff within 10 seconds.
This ain't Oregon 2010. That's not what we're talking about.
That is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the greatest show on turf, like speed wise. You know what I mean? Like that is not what we're talking about. What we are talking about, and look, no team huddles anymore. So I'm not talking about, hey, we just don't want to huddle like that. Look, Notre Dame, when they are running their offense past few years, they're very methodic about it. Now, are they huddling? No. Now, there was a few games where they did huddle because they thought that their signs were getting stolen by Clemson and things like that. That's good. I have no problem with that, right? That was a direct
great mind games by Clemson, too, by the way.
And that's awesome.
You're getting them out of what they do.
What they want to do, yes. Right. But Notre Dame, they were not huddling, but they would get to the line, and they would look
very
over.
Methodical.
And they weren't hustling to the line. I mean, they were getting to the line, right? And there's a big difference between hustling to the line and then just getting to the line, looking over. What we're talking about tempo-wise is hustle to the line, like get to the line, right. Get in your formation, get ready to go. If you need to look over to the line, then that's fine. You look over to the sideline, you get the play, and then you go, right? It's not, okay, we're here, we're looking at all the signs and blah, blah, blah. Like, it needs to be faster than that, and it's hustling to the line. And the difference is when you're methodic to the line, defense can still make subs. They can still do some different things. Notre Dame was subbing in and out, even though they weren't huddling. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about keeping the same personnel, getting to the line quickly, moving things along a little bit. You can look to the line real quick. Okay, now we go. Yeah. Right. That prevents the defense from subbing. So you're going to keep them in the same package, things of that nature. Some teams are going to be good at that. Some teams are not going to be good at that. It has to be, you have to think about that, but it's moving things along a little bit faster.
The other part of it too is by being more methodical in how you approach offense, it allows the defenses to get into the calls they want to do.
Exactly.
It allows them. So like when you're playing Georgia, for example, Georgia likes to do a lot of line games before the snap. It's partly why Notre Dame had some false starts against them in 2019, where the whole front will just shift quickly in one direction. Right. This eliminates that, because then you run the risk of you're mid shift and we're snapping the ball
out of it completely. Right? Yeah, correct.
It allows them to get into more complex calls. Hey, let's get this call in, and it allows them to identify how Notre Dame is lining up, and then get lined up accordingly, and then make the right call. Now, there's always going to be times, even you watch Oklahoma, there's plenty of times they snap the ball with under 10 seconds left, but they're getting lined up, they're pressing the defense, seeing what the defense is going to do, and then quickly getting a call. So then they're snapping the ball as the defense is trying to make their adjustments to whatever it is Oklahoma's doing. And so again, can it mean at times, hey, we're just going to come out and we're going to go really fast. We're going to run 3 plays this drive. Okay. So we're going to line up. We're going to get the first 2 plays called, right? And this is what you'll do too. So you're in the sideline, your offense is together. Hey, listen, we're going to go with 2 calls. And heck, I've seen D3 teams do this. I know Notre Dame can do this. We're going to go with 2 calls. On the first play, we're going to run this. Barring something bad happening, we're going to line up immediately and go to this. And, so we're going to call outside zone on the first play. Okay. Second play, we're going to call, play action shot, whatever. Okay. And so you can line up and get quick. And then if you have success with your first 2 plays and all of a sudden you keep it going, right? And you know, as a coordinator, I've only got a couple calls. We're just going to go with a couple calls this series. We're not going to have our whole repertoire because we're just trying to screw with you now at this point in time. And then now they're going to be, spend the whole next series like, how do they adjust to the tempo? And then you're not doing tempo. You're going to line up real quick. You're going to go. You're going to make that first call. You're going to then hustle up to the line. They're going to think you're doing it again. And then you're going to do this. And then all of a sudden, either they jump or you do that, and then you look to the sideline, you get your play call. And then Tommy Rees said in that interview that when they did the whole look to the sideline to get the right call thing, they were really good, is what he noted. So they've looked at the data and said, hey, when we get lined up quickly and then we get a check-in, we were pretty effective.
Yeah.
Well, in order to do that, you have to be quick. You can't do that with 3 seconds left on the clock. And that's what would happen last year a lot is they would do that, but they were so kind of methodical getting lined up that then they had to hustle around real quick, get the right call, and then quickly snap the ball. Well, when you snap the ball with under 5 seconds, the defense knows the ball's about to get snapped.
Exactly.
And they're prepared. And they know there's only so much you can or can't do. Plus, now you've just made a check with 5 seconds left, and you're quickly trying to hustle and get lined up. You don't have time for communication, certainty of execution, and all that kind of stuff. So tempo, to me, is a part of it. And again, we're not talking about the breakneck, Oregon offense of 2010 here with Chip Kelly. That's not what we're talking about. But I do think that tempo, and I think that teams that are really effective, in my opinion, a lot of times, Vince, they're teams that effectively mix up tempo.
Exactly.
And I think that's where Notre Dame would be, is they're never going to be super fast. They weren't really like that at Cincinnati either. That's a common misconception about Cincinnati. Cincinnati was not they were not like Oregon. They ran with tempo, but it wasn't like what we saw at Oregon or teams like that. That just isn't who they were. The second piece to me in explosive offense, Vince, is you have to be balanced. And here's what balance is not. X number of running plays versus X number of pass plays.
Like the percentages.
Or X number of rush yards to balance, Vince, is really easy. You have to be effective at both. You have to be explosive and efficient at both. Meaning, you got something to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, so for example, let's talk about the 2018 Clemson game, okay? Clemson defensively said, look, Notre Dame's not going to throw the ball on us, so we're going to pack the box and we're going to make them beat us through the air, okay?
Right.
Because Notre Dame wasn't balanced. So the balance that we're talking about is if a team's going to do that, you can throw the ball effectively and force them to get out of that, right? And if they're going to overplay the pass game, well, you can run the ball effectively and force them to get out of it. You being balanced keeps the defense balanced, right? And it doesn't allow them to overplay one thing or the other to negatively affect what you're trying to do offensively. But you can make them pay for it.
There you go. And that's what happened because I think the game you pointed out is a great example, Vince. Because what Notre Dame also said to Clemson was, we're taking the run game away. You have to take something away. Say, hey, we're going to make you beat us with something different. Well, for about almost 2 full quarters, Clemson couldn't do that. They had 9 points. Right. 3 of those points came off a short field. They had like 1 good drive. That was it. Well, then what happened in that game? Clemson hit about 2 big plays and 2 big pass plays. And all of a sudden, just like that, it was 23-3. 2 big pass plays. Yep. And then third quarter, they come out. Clemson can't move the ball again in the third quarter. Then all of a sudden, because Notre Dame is so committed to making a play because they were behind, Clemson rips off a big run play. Clemson played better than Notre Dame did on 5 plays in that game. That was it.
Yeah.
That was 5 plays led to 30-3.
Yeah.
Right? Notre Dame could not take advantage of similar plays. Had opportunities, but they couldn't make the plays in the pass game to do it. Now, there's other times where, when you look at certain teams like, to me, Alabama this year, I look at Alabama and I say, this is a team that to me was a team that was built around throwing the football. Right now, they talk about Steve Sarkisian talks about we were balanced. And it's like, well, you look at the numbers, you really weren't. You averaged 358.2 passing yards per game, and you averaged 183.5 rushing yards per game. No one that views balance from a percentage or yardage standpoint is going to look at Alabama and think they were overly balanced this year. But the key to Alabama was you could take away certain things that they did, and it wouldn't matter.
Right?
They could still beat you. Right. And so to me, that's something I look at. So Texas A&M came into that Alabama game and they said Alabama's not running on us because that's what Alabama had kind of always prided itself on. So they only rushed for 109 yards against Texas A&M, but they threw for 435. Then there was other games where teams said, "Hey, look, we're gonna limit your ability to throw the football." Notre Dame basically said, "Hey, you're not going to throw the ball downfield on us." So Alabama said, "Okay, fine. We're going to run the ball. We're going to have our quick game. We're going to have our screens. We're going to have other ways to beat you." You look at LSU in 2019, Vince, is another great example of, they were a team that clearly was a team that was built around throwing the football. I mean, clearly built around that. Well, if you look at some of their games, I mean, their pass game, they threw for a good amount of yards against Auburn, but Auburn did a pretty good job, in my opinion, of that game of making them a little bit less efficient in the pass game. And so LSU had to ramp up a little bit of the run game. They forced a turnover in that game. And LSU went out and, ran the ball ahead, had some big plays effectively in the run game. And then that opened up opportunities for the pass game later. And so basically, we're good at whatever we need to do. And we can beat you running. We can beat you throwing down the field. We can beat you throwing intermediate. We can beat you throwing short. We can do all those kind of things. That's what balance is. If you're a one-dimensional offense, you're going to be in trouble. And that's something that's helped Oklahoma in most of these playoff games is you look at Oklahoma against Alabama in 2018. I mean, it was 45-34, I believe, was the final. But Oklahoma could move the ball on Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Their problem was more defensively. I mean, most teams you score 34 points against Alabama, you've done a pretty good job offensively, right?
Sure.
I mean that's really the thing. I think for me, what has hurt Oklahoma is you look at earlier in their tenure, some of their bigger games, Clemson, Texas back in 2015. You look at Houston in 2016. All games they lost, Oklahoma rushed for less than 100 yards in those games. And that's kind of what's going to – but you look at fast forward to 2017, they go to overtime against Georgia, almost beat Georgia. That was a very competitive game. They ran for over 200 yards that game. More balance equals greater success, in my opinion. And that to me is where it needs to be. I mean, Notre Dame they need to get there. So third point, Vince, is you have to be able to attack the perimeter of the defense. Yes. Notice we didn't say you have to be able to attack the perimeter of the defense with the pass game or the run game. We just said you have to be able to attack the perimeter. And ideally, it needs to be happening in a lot of different ways. I think for me, Vince, there are really 4 ways to attack the perimeter here that I'm referring to, and you can add some to it if you want. Number 1, we're both going to agree. You have to be able to get the ball outside with your run game and screen game. And to me, those two things go hand in hand.
Because you've got players, and it's not just, hey, we're going to force these guys to do that out on the perimeter. We're going to get the ball out to Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool and whatever. No, they've got the personnel that I want the ball in their hands on the perimeter. Like that fits this group. You need the ball
right
out
and
there.
It needs to always be a part of who they are, which is why we've focused so much on how they recruit.
Yes,
you need to build to that point as well.
Absolutely.
This year they do have that potential, and they need to utilize it effectively. And that, to me, pass game wise, that's all 3 levels that you need to be able to attack the perimeter downfield. You need to be able to attack the perimeter on the intermediate stuff. And that's something that made that 2018 offense so good, Vince, because they would outcut you and come back you. And I mean, Ian was so good in 2018 on those intermediate perimeter throws to Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool. You remember that? I mean, he'd just bang those, deep out cuts, and he'd bang those comebacks and those throws like that. And then, of course, the other piece to this, did you want to add something to that part, Vince?
Well, I was just going to say the reason that you want to attack the perimeter, right? Look at the defense, okay? The more you can spread them out, it's just like basketball. If you can get guys out of the lane, okay, you can spread them out, the better you're going to be offensively, right? Well, it's the same thing for football. Look, if you show that as an offense that you can go sideline to sideline with throwing the ball on the perimeter, you can get it short perimeter, medium perimeter, long perimeter, right? Corner routes, fade routes, whatever. If you can prove that you can, hit that perimeter, you're going to spread the defense out. They have to respect that, right? Whether it's going to be the linebackers getting out more, whether it's going to be the corners, the safeties, whatever. And then it opens up the middle. Okay. So That's why being a sideline to sideline team is so important offensively, because you want to spread that defense out, right? I mean, that's the modern way that offenses are doing their thing. They're spreading defenses out, and it allows their playmakers to be in space. And that's what this team is good at this year, I think.
So let's show a clip based on that. And again, attacking the perimeter, to me, the last two pieces are you also need to be able to do it with your quick game in your RPOs.
Yes. Oh,
that's why RPOs are so important. But let's look at this against Clemson last year in the ACC title game. This is one of the disadvantages to how Notre Dame lines up and plays. Look at how Clemson is playing Notre Dame. They're playing Notre Dame saying, I dare you to throw the football. I dare you. Look at the number of guys. I'm going to pull this up here. Look at the number of players they had so close to the line of scrimmage, right? They had really 9 guys right there.
Yes, they do.
Right? And that was something we saw a lot. You want to know a big reason why Kyron Williams only averaged 5.3 yards per carry? Because he was running into that consistently.
Walls.
Because what Notre Dame did not do last year is show the ability to really beat you on the perimeter. They could occasionally beat you downfield with the vertical game to Javon McKinley, but they weren't afraid of Ben Skoranek catching a quick ball here. They weren't afraid of a quick RPO happening. They weren't afraid of that at all. They weren't afraid of a quick perimeter screen. They knew, based on what they saw from Notre Dame, that the lack of RPOs in the offense, the lack of really the any kind of explosiveness on the perimeter made Notre Dame very easy to defend when they went to their 12 personnel. And that's what Notre Dame has lined up in here is 12 personnel. 12 personnel being one running back, 2 tight ends. So you have your running back here, right? And then you have tight end right here, tight end 1, and this is tight end 2, right? And then you have 2 receivers. Well, when Notre Dame did that, teams just said, okay, there's a very high percentage that they're going to run the ball. And if they are going to throw, it's going to be to this guy, not that guy. That was Tommy Tremble. Because Tommy was only, as I said, only 37% of the plays he was in the game did he run a pass route compared to 59% for Michael Mayer. That's a tell. That's something that a good, well-coached defensive team is going to say, okay, we know they're not going to use that guy. It's also not a coincidence that Notre Dame did utilize Tommy Tremble early in the game against Clemson in November, and the offense was moving when they used their second tight end to throw the football. So when you look at that, Vince, you say this is what we're referring to. If you can't force teams out of the box, this is the point you were talking about, is you're going to have a hard time really having the kind of effectiveness in the big games that you need to have.
Absolutely. And looking at that, can you pull that back up real quick, Brian?
Sure.
I just want to, like, as an offensive coordinator, why, and I realize that there's a lot more going on here, but Clemson is basically giving Notre Dame, you're right, they're daring Notre Dame to throw the ball.
And FYI, this was an early down situation. This wasn't like 3rd and 2. I'm not I'm not trying
that's
to
even worse.
Spin it, right? This is if this was a 3rd and 2, it would be a more understandable alignment for both teams.
Sure.
3rd and 1. This is a base down is the reason that I'm showing this.
I mean, if you have any faith in your passing game whatsoever, you're having the field receiver run a slant right now. Right. Boom.
And look at this cornerback. The way that this corner right here is playing, he is basically saying, "Hey, I'm going to play an out cut." Right?
Yes.
So what Clemson or what Bama would do right here is they'd run an RPO. Right? They'd run an RPO would basically get these 2 guys blocking. Right? Mm-hmm. Which is going to keep this guy and this guy playing run.
Correct.
If you just drop back, then this guy jumps underneath it, right? But if you're going to do an RPO here, you're running the ball. It's not a play action. You are running the ball. Every tell is going to have that linebacker thinking, I got to squeeze on Kyron Williams. What Bama would do is they would have him lean outside because when the reason he's playing this way, the reason this corner is playing with this technique, okay, is because he says, I'm going to take away your inside. I want you to go outside, and then I'm going to take that outside, right? So he's playing inside leverage, and he's forcing outside. He wants to jump that outside. Well, Alabama would lean that out and then break that off underneath, whether it be a slant or an undercut. That's what they call their glance route. It allows for some adjustment by the receiver based on how the defender's playing. But you're going to have a nice window here, right, to be effective. And Notre Dame doesn't have that. And he knows that they don't have that. He
Right.
knows that everything that they're going to do is going to be vertical. That would be the big thing. So when you look at that, you say that's a box you're going to have a hard time running into. Now, look, here's the deal. Most of the teams on Notre Dame's schedule are not good enough to stop Notre Dame last year with the line they had and the run game they had. We're not good enough to stop Notre Dame even when they knew it was coming.
Yeah.
Can't do that against Clemson.
Look, the overall issue that we have with Notre Dame's offensive philosophy right now is that, look, 9, 10, sometimes 11 games out of the season, Notre Dame can just line up and run whatever they want, and it's not going to matter. They're still going to be better than the team that's across from them. And look, that's a testament to what Brian Kelly has done with this team. He has put Notre Dame in position to be better than 90% of the teams that they're going to play on a regular basis. Okay. And they can run whatever they want, and it's not going to make a hill of beans difference what they're running. They're still going to win that game. Okay. Because they have a dominant defense and they're better than the guys across from them. What we're saying, what this whole show is about, it's about, okay, Notre Dame needs to take that next step, and you need to use some philosophy when the guys you're going up against are either better than you or equal to you, right? And the only time Notre Dame is really going to see that is if, okay, they play Clemson in the regular season, or obviously somebody on their schedule is going to step up. Let's say USC, steps up and gets a lot better, or when they're in the playoff. And that's when Notre Dame has struggled, because they can't just line up and do what they do, right? Mm-hmm. They have to advance their philosophy a little bit offensively, and that's the whole point of what we're talking about right now.
Let's show a clip of the first game. Clemson had obviously a lot of success moving the ball on Notre Dame. This is a clip from the November 7th game, right? Look at the difference. Notre Dame cannot they've got 6 in the box. Now you could argue a 7 here if they're going to run perimeter run here, right? You've got a 7th guy there, but Notre Dame has to spread out. Now you can get him here, but you even with a great player like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Clemson was able to take advantage of that spacing. There was a particular play. This is Amari Rodgers right here. There was a particular play in that game where Jeremiah Owusu got in space against Amari Rodgers. He kind of looked to play the run, was a second late getting out to Amari Rodgers. So what does Amari Rodgers do? He catches the ball, makes Jeremiah miss in space, and all of a sudden a 5-yard pass turns into almost a 30-yard gain against the best linebacker in college football last year. Because even the best linebacker in college football is going to get beat at times in space. It's just going to happen. I don't care who you are. So that's the thing is now, does that mean Notre Dame has to come out and line up like this every play? No, it's not what we're saying at all. But you have to be able to hurt teams when you are going to line up the way that Notre Dame lines up. And that's our point, is you have to be able to do things schematically to say, hey, look, we're going to line up this way, but if you try to overplay us in a certain way, we're still going to hurt you. And I think that's the key for Notre Dame. When you get into the situation is they have to be able to say, hey, look, we're going to make you pay in a lot of different ways. So here's another key to being an explosive offense, Vince, and that is you have to be able to scheme for success. What that means is it actually means several things. And we talked about this before the show. It means, number one, it's not just about building around what you do best. It's also about designing schemes to attack where they're weak. Not just weak from a schematic standpoint, but also weak from a personnel standpoint. Notre Dame needs to do a better job of that. It's about being able to use formations and shifts and alignment, something that I think Notre Dame does and will continue to do even better at, is using those type of things to say, hey, we're going to use motions and shifts and personnel to get an isolation against that we want. We want this guy matched up against that guy. It's something Tommy Rees talked about in the interview. And sometimes that means our W is going to be in the slot one play because we really want to get our this receiver lined up in this particular way. And so those things are all going to mean different things at different times, Vince, and that's going to be a really important piece of it. And then, to me, the final piece of scheming for success, and this is kind of where Coach Rees got into it, that's where efficiency comes from too. Scheming for success means you have to be great on first down. And if you get into a bunch of second and shorts and, 2nd and 1 to 4, the world's your oyster. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because there's nothing you can't do. You can do a double reverse throwback attempt, and if it's incomplete, it's third and manageable. You can still run on third down, in those situations. And so Notre Dame has to be really good on first down, and they have to move the chains. Efficiency also involves moving the chains. Last year, Notre Dame got there. Third down, Notre Dame was as good as anybody in the country. I mean, they were 7th, I think, in the country last year in third down. And so there was a good deal of efficiency that they had last year. They had the efficiency part down last year. They didn't have the explosive part, which is why when they played Clemson in the ACC title game, when Clemson was healthy, and when they played Bama, the offense couldn't do anything because you didn't have the explosiveness. But if you go fast, rewind to the November 7th game, Notre Dame ripped off some big plays in the first half, and it helped them be more successful offensively. You had the Kyron Williams long run. You had a couple big gains from Javon McKinley in the first half. Well, in the second half, Notre Dame lost all that. They were just trying to go back to running the football, and they did nothing in the second half offensively until the final drive when they opened it up and got the ball down the field again. So to me, that again, you have to be explosive and efficient. But look, it's hard to be. You can also err on the other side.
Sure.
I would argue the 2017 Notre Dame offense was as explosive as any team in the country. I mean, they could go for 80 on any particular play. If you remember that with Brandon Wimbush and Josh Adams, Dexter Williams. I mean, how many 80, 70-plus yard runs did they have that year? I mean, you think Wimbush had a 60-something yard touchdown run. He had a 50-yard touchdown run against Wake Forest. Josh Adams had how many 60-plus yard 5 of 60 or more at least. Dexter Williams had some long runs. Heck, Deion McIntosh was ripping off some long runs in games.
Yes,
you know what I mean? But what that team lacked was efficiency. They were home run or bust. They were kind of like the Adam Dunn of college football that year. They were either going to hit a home run or strike out. When they couldn't hit home runs against against Georgia, they couldn't score. They couldn't hit home runs against Miami. They couldn't score. Well, the last couple teams that they've had, especially the 2020 team, they couldn't really hit the home runs, but they had the efficiency part. So, both ways will get you to the dance. But if you want to beat Clemson in one of those big games, you want to beat Bama, you want to beat Ohio State, you want to beat, Georgia, Oklahoma in those big games, and we're talking postseason, you have to have both. And that's where Notre Dame is lacked and what we're saying is you've got to be great on third down. You've got to move the chains, because the more times you move the chains, the more opportunities there are for you then to hit that next big play. And so, you can't be 3 and out, and then 70-yard touchdown, 3 and out, 70-yard touchdown, 4 and out, 70-yard touchdown. That's going to look great, but you got 21 points.
Yeah.
Hey, we had 3 70-yard. You have to, it's about adding them both. And to me, that's a key ingredient to being an explosive. And that's why we've always said, Vince, explosive and efficient. We always put those two together.
Well, and I would be remiss if we didn't bring up the red zone too, Brian, because Notre Dame, 2 years ago and 3 years ago was really good in the red zone. And then last year,
during Chip Long's tenure, they were really, they were excellent in the red zone.
And then last year, it just kind of fell off the map. They were like 120 plus.
102nd.
102nd. Okay, There you go. If it's 3 digits, I don't really care where it is in the 3 digits. 3 digits is bad. If you're being ranked amongst all the NCAA teams. And
look, just real quick to add context, Vince.
Yeah.
The last 3 national champs in red zone offense have ranked 8th, Bama, 2nd, LSU, and Clemson was the worst at 31st.
There you go. I mean, you have to be efficient in the red zone. Once you get down there, you got to score touchdowns because field goals aren't going to do it, right? I mean, you have to score touchdowns, and Notre Dame has proven that they can do that. It's just last year they did not do that very well, and it hurt them. It really did hurt. They were great between the 20s, but as soon as they got to that end zone or that red zone, it was rough. They were not scoring touchdowns, and that bit them.
Yeah. And last year to me, they finally got really good at on third down. But the year before, when they were great, here's the thing: it's the issue with Notre Dame, Vince, is they're never able to do it all at once. So last year they were great on third down, finished 7th in the country. The year before, but they were bad in the red zone. The year before, they were great in the red zone, but they were bad on third down. They were 65th on third down.
Yeah.
That's the problem. It's never both of them at the same time.
Right.
You need to be just as
Right.
good in the red zone as they were during the Chip Long era, but then also as good as they were on third down last year. And we talked a lot last year, Vince, I thought Tommy Rees had some really creative third down calls that we would sometimes say, hey, why don't you do that more on first and second down? For an example, I think it was Pitt, it was an example where they motioned Avery Davis down. He started out outside, I believe, but he motions down inside. They use the guy that was up front, and he runs off the coverage, and then Avery just kind of does a delay outcut, and it's about as easy of a 3rd and 5 pickup as you're ever going to have because you schemed your way into success. You said, hey, we're going to isolate Avery on a guy that he has out leveraged. We're going to run off the second level coverage with the inside with the receiver at the ball, and we're going to get Avery in an isolation, and he's going to get open for a 5-yard gain. That's great. That's scheming for success.
Correct.
The problem is we didn't see that same kind of creativity a lot on first and second down because of the identity that they wanted to have, which is we're gonna run it at you and take some shots downfield.
But doesn't that give you hope? Because we've seen them be creative, and I guess we've seen Tommy Rees be creative.
We saw it in the spring game too. I mean, we saw a similar concept in the spring game to Chris Tyree where they went empty, right? And I'd have to find the play, but they went empty, and they used the inside receiver to kind of run off, and then Tyree ran a pivot route, and he got open in the flat. I should have found that play before we came here. We could have pulled it up on the chalkboard, but that's an example of what we're talking about here. They had 5 guys in a route, but they had 1 guy they were trying to get the ball to on that particular play, right? And that was Chris Tyree. And so they schemed it. They schemed it from a formational standpoint pre-snap. Right. Then they used the motion to kind of get him stacked. And then they ran him off, and then they used him to run a different kind of route. So, I mean, to me, we've seen it. We've seen them do it. Now
gives me hope.
And again, if we're going to be fair, for all of our criticism that we had of the offense last year, and I believe it was justified, they didn't have their 2 most explosive players for 95% of the season.
Yeah.
Kevin Austin and Braden Lindsey neither were healthy ever, fully healthy last year.
And look, in from a coaching standpoint, when you go into a season and you are planning your offense, around 2 explosive players, and look, I have no problem with that. That's a great way to run your offense. I have no problem with that. But when those guys both go down, you're like, well, let's go back to what we do. There is a point, and I realize there's 6 days in between games, and there's all these different excuses that you can make. But when you spent the entire offseason, you spent the entire fall camp getting ready for an offense, and it revolves around 2 guys, and those guys go down, that's tough. That is really,
and they
really
didn't
hard.
necessarily view that. They didn't necessarily look at their other receivers and say, hey, that guy can do what Braden can do.
Right, exactly. And they can't.
Or that guy can do what Kevin can do. I believe that Jordan Johnson could have done some of the things that Kevin Austin could do. I do. I believe. But again, that's a different conversation for a different day. They didn't necessarily want to say, let's throw freshmen into that very important role that we've been
getting. And I get that. I do.
Can I throw out another thing before we dive back into the show, Vince? Part of me wonders if deep down Brian Kelly knew, understandably, that last year's team was not one that was going to compete for a title. And I don't necessarily disagree. I don't think that team, when they lost the players they lost, was necessarily a team that was going to go play Alabama and beat Alabama unless Alabama made a bunch of mistakes.
Sure.
I don't think they viewed themselves as, because it wasn't as necessarily good of a team and all around as some of the previous teams, in my view. And maybe they just said, hey, look, this is what we got to do to win as many games as possible. We know we're going to have a hard time beating those teams at the end of the day. But that's also why they looked a little bit more creative and a little opened things up a little bit more in the first half against Clemson last year. Because I think they knew that they couldn't just line up and ground and pound against Clemson. And when they had that early run success, right, that long run to Kyron Williams, that then opened up some opportunities that they took advantage of with the pass game, getting Tommy Tremble involved, taking some deep shots to Javon McKinley, things that we didn't necessarily see it much of in the last 2 games of the season. So that's part of it too. I wonder. That's just pure conjecture on my part, absolutely. But part of me wonders that. But they look at this team and say, okay, these guys are healthy. Xavier Watts is older. Lawrence Keys is back on track. Lawrence had some sicknesses he dealt with last year too. It wasn't just And then the whole COVID aspect of it. Like, look, we know we can do this. We know we can line up and we can run it down people's throats and stop them from scoring. And we look at our schedule. It ain't that tough. We got like really one good team on our schedule, well, two good teams on our schedule. That's it. We can just kind of roll the ball. I mean, think about how bad they played against Louisville and Duke and still won both games. You know what I mean? Like,
no, you're right.
You know, we can just roll the ball out and beat 10 of the teams on our schedule, or 8 or 9 of the teams on the schedule,
which is true.
Yeah,
it's true. And that's what I'm saying. Look, you can be, how do I want to say this? You can be upset that Notre Dame isn't competing with the big boys the way we want them to compete with the big boys, and that is a justifiable, emotion. And I have it, but you also have to appreciate what Brian Kelly has done up to this point, getting Notre Dame to the point where they can beat most of the teams on their schedule just by lining up and going, because that wasn't the case when Brian Kelly took over.
Oh, heck no.
It just wasn't. So, there are positives here, right? But we believe that they can take that next step, right? So I think I'm repeating myself, I feel like, but
it's okay.
It's so important for people.
You're starting to get fired up. That's why.
Yeah, it's so important to understand that this isn't the same Notre Dame team that we were talking about 15 years ago, 10 years ago. This is a different team. This is a team that can beat 95% of the teams out there just by showing up and being a dominant team. It's just there is another level. There's another level if they want to win a national championship.
Real quick, too, one other piece to that of scheming for success is you have to keep teams off balance. Mm-hmm. You do that personnel-wise. You do that with motions and shifts, and you do it with tempo, and you do it with play calls. Like, hey, one series we may come out and do this, the next series we may come out and do that. That is also something that makes me very excited for this team, is because you can come out one series and, you could literally go 3 tight ends and 2 backs. On first down, you have 3 tight ends lined up, you have 2 backs, and you run the football. The next series you could be empty with that same personnel and be dangerous.
Yes. Exactly.
And so, because again, what are you going to do defensively? Are you going to keep your base defense in, and we're just going to run it down your throat the entire series, right? Or take some shots to our tight ends or our backs out of the backfield. If you go to big personnel, which a lot of teams would do, you're going to put in an extra linebacker. Well, that's fine. We're going to empty it out, and we're going to ISO, Kyron Williams on a linebacker or a safety, or we're going to have Michael Mayer ISO'd against a corner, where he's going to be able to use his size. So I'm not saying you're going to do that all game, but that's a nice little wrinkle you can throw at teams. And then the next series, you can go 10 personnel, 1 back, 0 tight ends, 4 receivers, and be just as dangerous. And so those are the things that I look at and say, you have to be able to keep teams off balance. What did Alabama do? Probably 65 to 70% of their snaps in the first half against Florida in the SEC title game. They went 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. It kept Florida. It forced Florida to say, "Hey, look, they got Najee Harris in the backfield and 2 tight ends. We have to respect the run game a little bit more." And so then what did Alabama do? They used that to attack down the field. Play action shots, hitting Devontae on a crosser, for a big play for a touchdown, because Florida had to respect that run game. That opened up Devontae on a drag over top for in between the safeties and underneath the safeties and over top of the linebackers for a big play.
Yeah.
And so you're keeping teams off balance. That's a big piece. And then the final piece is you have to be able to take some shots. You have to be able to throw the ball down the field effectively.
And we know that's what people think about when we talk about being explosive. It's those long bombs, all of those different things. And look, is that exciting? Yeah, absolutely it is. And is that part of being explosive? Absolutely it is. But it's a piece. An important piece. It's a piece that needs to be there. Like there has to be a trigger man. There has to be somebody willing to do that, and there has to be a play caller willing to call those plays as well to stretch the defense. We talked about stretching the defense sideline to sideline, how that's important. Well, you also need to stretch the defense front to back. You want to spread that defense out. If they're not afraid of you going over the top, guess what? Those safeties are going to be peeking up. They're going to have their eyes in the backfield. That includes
against the pass game, the screens, and those things become less effective.
And they can blow up those slants, and they can blow up all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. But if there is a threat of the deep ball, then that opens up everything that's intermediate and underneath. So it is an important piece to this. It's just not the only piece to this. And I think that's what a lot of people think about when we talk about being explosive. So Notre Dame has the ability to do everything that we just talked about. And I am optimistic that there are pieces of this that we're going to see. I really am confident of that. I just hope that it all comes together and does what we think it's going to do, but it's definitely possible.
I'm going to give 3 specifics, Vince, that I think we need to see from Notre Dame to get here. Okay. Now, there's a lot to it, but there's 3 things that we need to see that we haven't seen a lot of. Again, Notre Dame's got a lot of those pieces already in place, right? There are certainly pieces that are in place. Number 1, and this is, people know them, you have to have RPOs have to be a part of what you do.
No doubt.
In my opinion. I'm usually not one of those people that says, hey, you have to do A, B, or C, because I think there's all types of different ways to be successful. But I believe in today's era, the way that defenses play, the fact that teams put so much speed on the field now defensively, you have to be able to have success throwing the ball, or using RPOs. You have to be able to have ways that if a team is going to line up a certain way, you have to have built-in beaters for that. It's like back in the day, we would design blitz beaters on 3rd down.
Right.
Hey, look, we know that these are the 5 blitzes they like to bring on 3rd down. Here's the 2 or 3 concepts that we can call that we can beat them. Now you've got like basically built-in run game beaters every time you throw the ball or every time you call a run play. That's a must. You have the personnel to do it. You have to take advantage of it. You have to have those things. You need them on every down. It can't just be you do it 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10s again. It needs to be like 75, 80% of your runs need to have RPOs tied in, because you have the talent to do it, and it would keep teams honest. And now all of a sudden it also protects your offensive line. And now maybe a good offensive line becomes a great offensive line because they're constantly in favorable numbers. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of it, is getting in favorable numbers. Let's just do something, a little fun thought experiment, Vince.
Oh, I like
I'm going to pull up that play that we were looking at earlier. Yes. So let's say we get rid of that guy. Sorry, Tommy. Got nothing but love for you. Right? And you put a receiver here. Okay? So get rid of that guy. And you have to put him.
Yeah, he's got to bump out.
He's got to be out there.
You just can't leave him uncovered. Yeah.
Right. So just that move alone, right, to me helps out, because now if you're going to play Notre Dame this way, okay, this guy is now in a spot. Okay, is he going to help out over here where you have your stud tight end and Javon McKinley, your 2 best receivers? Okay, well, if he's going to do that, because they're playing tight down here. This guy's in tight coverage. This guy's in tight coverage, right? Well, that's a matchup I like. So if I'm Jack Cohn or if I'm Ian Book, at the snap of the ball, I'm looking to my left, trying to get this safety down here.
You got to influence,
because I got some ISO 101s down here, right?
Absolutely.
So that's just one way right there, with that one formational shift right there. Because now, if this guy's going to drop and this guy have to play there, now you've got some things where you can run inside zone here, and now you've got a nice little potential for a cutback lane here, right? I mean, so there's some things that you can do there. And then if this guy wants to peek inside, you can just pull it and throw a little bubble screen out here or something like that, right? I mean, you've got some advantages. And then if you're going to be hitting with the perimeter screens here, the quick outs there, now this guy who's playing about 8 yards off the ball, 8, 9 yards off the ball, this guy right here, he's got to come down a little bit. Okay. And then what tends to happen is, now instead of having this safety down here, it's getting a little bit cluttered. So let's get rid of some of that. So, right. So this guy's gone. This guy's gone. You got a receiver out here to DB out here, right? Well, now you're spread out a little bit more. It's pretty risky having this guy down here. So what most likely would happen is this safety would move here, and this guy would have to come back. Mm-hmm. And now you've got another guy out of the box.
Now I like my box.
Now I like my numbers. So now my 6 blockers here are going against 6 defenders there.
Right.
Okay.
And most of the time, if you're running read zone or something along those lines, one of those guys isn't even blocked. So now you've got 6 for 5.
Right.
Because there's somebody that has to be the read man. Right.
But,
and that's a numbers game that you're playing.
Right. Now, here's another thing to look at it. Let's just go with what Notre Dame actually did. Okay. So you're running the football here. So let's say you're going to run a read zone here. So you're going to block. Here's another reason RPOs are down. Why is this guy down? Why is this defender right here so aggressively down in the box? Because he's playing the run. Why is this guy so deep? Because he's 15 yards off the ball. These two guys are making sure that he's not running down the field. Okay. So now you get called an RPO. He's blocking, so he steps down. Well, now all of a sudden, I got a nice little one-on-one that I like over here with Javon McKinley, whether it be a go route off an RPO, whether it be a quick post off an RPO where these guys come down, these guys come down, these guys come down. This guy back here, right here, this safety right here, if we're showing run right there, inside run, these guys are going to come down. That's how they're going to play it. Otherwise, you're just going to gash them all day with 4 and 5 yard runs.
Right.
This guy's going to play. He's going to have to pedal back. That you don't, that's just who he's going to be. All of a sudden, Javon McKinley can bang a post here. Well, that post can bend inside depending on what this guy does. So if he stays back, then you just bang that quick. The quarterback's going to hit him right out of his break, right? You could also do a similar thing here. You could kind of do a post here, and you could do something there off an RPO. Let me clean this up a little bit. You could do something here where you get this post here, and then you bang a post, a little quick post, like a skinny post, or a quick post. You call it a glance, whatever you want to do.
And you're basically reading that safety to figure out where he's going to go. If he drops to the right, well, you got one-on-one. If he drops to the left, you still have one-on-one. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. And then you pull it and you throw it.
And again,
right?
it's a one-player read, which
it's that guy.
Not difficult to do. A college quarterback can make a one-player read. Okay.
Right. And essentially, and if these guys aren't coming up and playing the run, then you're just handing the ball off.
Yeah, right.
That's the thing is
you're
going to have your read key, right? So whether you're handing the ball off, most likely be here,
key. Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Here, depending on what kind of, what call you're going to make, that's going to be as far as you're pulling off. But then once you pull, you're just throwing away from that guy. You like your one-on-ones. And look, Notre Dame had plenty of success winning one-on-ones against Clemson's corners last year. There's no doubt about it. They were open plenty of times in this game.
Yes, they were.
Ben Skoranek should have had about 4 or 5 more catches in this game than what he did. Javon McKinley should have had about 4 or 5 more catches than what he did. Just on times they were open on the plays they actually called.
Right.
That's a different conversation for a different day. But now all of a sudden Clemson's in a bind, right? So we know that Notre Dame is going to line up in 2 tight ends, but we know Notre Dame has no problem calling RPOs, whether it be quick stuff, right, or deep stuff, or one-on-ones. We know that Notre Dame is not afraid to call that. Or, what Notre Dame could also do is run an RPO. Again, it's not always RPOs. It's also, we're going to run a quick thing here where you're going to delay and then run him right up the seam. Because we got you playing hard downhill against our run. Okay, there's no way that guy can get over there unless he just takes off. And then I got that, right? But now all of a sudden you read, you carry out that fake, and then you just quickly pull and just throw it right behind the linebackers to Michael Mayer running down the field. Right? And then you'd run Javon like on a little quick out to take that corner, because you don't want to run a deep route there, because if you run a deep route on that particular play, then that corner opens and runs with you, and then he can squeeze on that route to Michael Mayer, right? So you'd run, since they're clearly like a cover 1 type of look, you'd run a quick out there. He's going to take it, and then that's, you can hit it. So there's so many things that you can do out of this and this is what we talked about, scheming for success. Okay, you want to put 8 in the box? This is what we're going to do to beat you.
You have to punish
but RPOs
teams
have to be a big part of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing is, what you don't want to necessarily do is, we called inside zone here. They got us outnumbered, or the numbers aren't great. What do you audible? Does the quarterback check? And then now they have a chance to check. Hey, they checked. And so, the check causes Kyron Williams to step up this way. Well, now if Kyron Williams, he checks and he steps up over here pre-snap, they know that he's now getting into a pass blocking alignment. They can make a check, and then they can kind of be loose. He can kind of take a step out there, right? Well, then what do? Do you check again back into the run, and then they're just going to move right back in? That's why RPOs are so important, because you don't have to make a check.
Right.
Hey, look, we've got built-in calls. Now, there are things that you can do, like Oklahoma and Alabama both do this, where the quarterback and the receiver will actually communicate, and he'll give them a sign. Hey, here's what I want you to run there right here. So if this cornerback was off, he would just tell Javon, like, hey, look, just give me, give me a little, quick out, and just bam, and it's stealing, just a little 5-6 easy yards.
Exactly.
Right? Or if he's playing up, like, hey, I want to take it over the top. So I'm just making up signals of what you can use. And then I'm reading
We do
it.
that in high school.
Yeah.
I mean,
or you have a glance or, whatever the case you have over here, whatever the case may be. And those are the things that you do, right? And then you can have some fun with it. So if this guy's playing like this, what you a lot of times you'll do is he's playing off so that way he can aggressively attack quick stuff. So he'll kind of flat foot and then drive. So if he sees a slant, he's going to drive on it and then, sluggo, right? So those are things that you can all do to be successful.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, that's why these things are so effective, because it's kind of like if you're a balanced team, and again, this is what we talk about. You have to be balanced. You have to be able to beat teams both ways. Because if you're doing RPOs, but you stink at throwing the football, they're not going to be afraid of it. Like, good, throw the ball. We want you to throw the ball.
Yeah,
right? It's kind of like when Navy throws. It's like, okay, good, Navy's throwing. They're not running the triple option. That's what we want. That's a win for us.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're not good at running, if you're not good at throwing the football or running the football, it doesn't matter because they're not going to play you this way. You're not going to see these boxes if you have really good pass game, but you can't run the football. They're going to fine, line up, run the ball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like USC tried to do that to Notre Dame in 2019. And USC came out and second half, they were just running the ball. Well, Notre Dame was kind of like, well, we'll let you do that because eventually they ran out of clock, right? There wasn't because that's not who you are. That's not what you do. We'll let you run the ball up the middle for 10, 12 yards. Because what we're not going to let you do is beat us for a 50-yard touchdown pass to Amon-Ra St. Brown or Tyler Vaughns or Michael Pittman, right?
Which is their strength. You got to take away the strength. Yeah, absolutely. And and here's another thing that you leave that up there for me, Brian, if you would.
Sure.
In this formation, right, they're not worried about Notre Dame using the perimeter, in the pass game. Because in this exact formation, if you didn't change anything, throw it right now to Ben Skoranek or whoever that receiver is right now, right? It's one-on-one, shake and bake. You're going to get 5 yards right now. Right. You know what I mean? Like, they're not afraid of that, though, because Notre Dame didn't show them that they could use.
And that's why he's playing the way he's playing.
That's exactly right. You're telling me that you put Xavier Watts out there, you name the Notre Dame wide receiver, right? That you could put out there right now. You throw him that look pass right now. I like Notre Dame's chances in one-on-one.
Look pass. That's what you're talking about. So that's the one. This guy is 9 yards off the ball.
Correct.
Well, you're talking about as a quarterback just catching it. He's not even doing a run fake. He's just catching it and quickly throwing. And it's just he just kind of you just turn.
Yes.
Okay, so this guy may come up and make the tackle for 3 or 4 yards. Okay, that's going to happen. But here, what happens if that one time this guy, Lawrence Keys or Xavier Watts or Avery Davis makes that guy miss, or Kevin Austin makes that guy miss, right? He stiff arms them, Now all of a sudden, you got this guy coming from way over here and this guy coming from here. Yep. We've already seen what happens to Nolan Turner when he gets Notre Dame players in space. Yeah, his jock strap is still at about the 40-yard line from what Kyron Williams did to him in that game, right?
Exactly.
So you guys see what we're saying? Like this is what we're saying. That's why RPOs are so important because you have built-in things, and you don't have to get into that chess game with your quarterback of audible to. If they do this, you check to this. If they do that, you check to that. If they come here, you check that. No, look, we've built this in. You have 3 options. You can give them a look, you can give them a slant, you can give them an out, or you can give them an out and a fake. I mean, whatever the looks are against those certain looks, and then he can say, okay, here, I'm going here. But he's still if we got numbers or this guy does this, we're still handing the ball off. And then that allows you to also then go more tempo because you don't have to stop, you don't have to adjust, you don't have to move Tommy Trumbull outside, right? I mean, none of that stuff is important. Now all of a sudden it's you kind of like where you're at. And here's the other thing I like about this too, Vince. If I remember correctly, I'm going to look this up just to be sure, but I believe that this player right here is a linebacker. Let me just look this up real quick. I am correct on that. This guy right here, it's a linebacker. That is Mike Jones. It's a good linebacker.
Sure.
But here's another thing I'd like to see Notre Dame do more. If he goes out here, who's going with him?
Right. It's going to be that guy right there.
You brought your safety down to the boundary. Your safety is now matched up with Michael Mayer. You have a linebacker matched up against Kyron Williams. I will take either one of those matchups.
Absolutely.
Right? And those are some of the things about scheming for success that we talked about. We lined up. We got them in the box. They're going to do this. And all of a sudden you put Kyron Tyree. It's a good name, Chris Williams or Kyron Tyree. That's kind of where you look at it and say, okay, those are matchups that you really like.
Yes.
And you have to be willing to do more of that stuff. And I think that's something we are going to see more of. And I think part of the reason we didn't see it last year is because, again, no one knew going into the season that Kyron Williams was going to be what Kyron Williams was.
Right.
So you don't necessarily build – I mean, to start fall camp, he was like their, third running back, right? I mean, he emerged as their top guy, but it wasn't like they spent the whole offseason, how do we build our offense around Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree? They were both unproven commodities.
Sure,
talented,
absolutely.
but unproven commodities.
Yeah.
So you're not necessarily going to just do a lot of this stuff. And they did some of that stuff during the season. BC, they did some of that interesting stuff, but they didn't do it enough, in my opinion, in some of these games. And those are things that you do early in the game to maybe get them into, where maybe they start putting their safety down here and they put their linebacker over here. Okay, well, then now you get into some things where you like that in the run game because
Sure.
they can't do that because they know that we're going to do this, right? Well, and then the other part when you talk about this is now you have this linebacker on your number 2 tight end, right? So then that's the other thing is, you run a vertical here, you run a vertical there, and then you run like some kind of ISO route here with Kyron Williams. Okay, what does this safety do? He can't help. If he helps outside, you now have Takis running down that seam against the linebacker, right? That's a matchup I like.
Yeah.
If he stays help over here, then you've now got Kyron against Mike Williams in that matchup, where you've got this matchup, with Lindsey or Watts or Keys or whatever. So there's just a lot of things you can do from this motion shift, scheming your way into success. But at the end of the day, RPOs have to be a part of that. So that's one thing that Notre Dame has to do. We kind of also hit on the other thing. I think Notre Dame needs to be real multiple. I would like to see them pare down the volume of calls.
Yeah.
And expand the usage of formations, personnel, and motions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I would like to see them do more of that, less concepts, more different ways of showing those concepts, which can
it's called
make it
window
very
dressing.
difficult.
It's window dressing, but it also all those different formations and motions and things of that nature allow you to get into matchups that are beneficial to you, right? And that's what Alabama did against Notre Dame, right? They matched up their Heisman Trophy winning wide receiver in positive ways, right? That's what Clemson did. They matched up their best receiver against Notre Dame's biggest liability in the defensive backfield, right? From formations and motions. And that's what's so important about that. That's why that's important.
Right. And then the third piece for me is schematically, I want to see Notre Dame do more movement routes. And I'm going to explain what I mean. I'm going to use this Clemson as an example because it's a little bit better formation instead of finding another Notre Dame formation. You'll understand. Notre Dame does a lot of vertical stationary routes. So a lot of sits, a lot of stops and comebacks, right? There's a time and a place for that. But I would like to see Notre Dame do more stuff, Vince, that gets them constantly moving. So more of this, more things where they're moving, more pivots. There's a lot
of the ball moving as
getting
opposed
the
to
defense running.
Stopped. Yeah, right.
Now, part of it is obviously you kind of mentioned it, Vince, is you want to get your guys moving. But the other part of it is I want the defense to always be moving too.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm running this concept here, right? They sink in underneath it. They kind of have it played. Okay, then I'm like, moving in and out, but you're not really an option there. It's hard to do that.
5 yards.
Right. And then now what do I got back here? Let's say I got a high-low concept back here. Well, I mean, that can be a little bit easier to play, but then you have to throttle down because you can't go all the way across because these guys are running stationary routes. It makes it makes it a little bit – it used to be better to do that stuff back in the day because you'd face more tight boxes. And so you could run a lot of curl flat concepts and things like that.
Sure.
It's a little bit harder to do now because of teams are already spread out so much. Now, Notre Dame still should have hit a couple curl flats in that ACC title game, including one on 3rd and 10 that if Ian Book just throws the ball like normal, Ben Skoranek catches it and it's moving the chains. But what you're going to see a lot of teams do is they're going to do a lot of just a lot of movement, Vince. And that's something that I want to see more of is more of this kind of stuff. More of this kind of stuff, things where you're getting guys moving more. You're doing things to run people off and then bring then bring a guy here or here, depending on what they do.
Sure.
So you could do something here where you're gonna run this guy out here. So you've ran off this guy, you've ran off this guy, you ran off this guy, and you ran, so you got those three guys are back. Well, then what are we going to do with these two guys? Okay, so how can we influence them? Okay, so this guy is out because he ran off there. So then you say, well, what can we do with this back to get these guys influenced? So we're going to do our back like this. Will they influence more to that? If he does a swing out here, will they be more influenced by that? So this swing route right here, will he be more influenced by that, which is going to cause these guys to fly, because then that's going to open up this? Or if this guy swings, we know these guys are going to drop hard, so then we can bring him on a little bit more of a shallow. And so then we can isolate this guy. Okay, so then let's say we know that this guy is going to drop. And let me clear some of this stuff. So let's say if you know that you're going to get this guy here, this guy's going to drop, then now you're ISOing this guy. This guy's back too. Okay, so then how do you want to ISO him? Do you want to ISO him here and here, where you get to get him an immediate jump and then you can kind of get something out in here? Or what I kind of like is he's going to come down here to play that, and then you can kind of bring this guy right over top. But we've seen Bama kills people with this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, but I mean, you're running people up, but it's all movement stuff. It's not, run a 12-yard stop route. It's let's get people running. Notre Dame does some of this, and when they've done it, it's been pretty effective. I'd like to see them run even more of this kind of stuff. But that's that scheming for success thing. And I think those are concepts that I think we could see Notre Dame do more of, that in my opinion would be really effective. And again, it's not anything new that they haven't shown before. It's just emphasizing it more. And this is what I'm saying. There's nothing new that Notre Dame needs to add to their offense. There's not a scheme. There's not
yeah.
I mean, they may say, you know what, man, we saw Oklahoma run this counter stuff, right? And they do it a little differently than us. So let's go talk to them about so why do we like to run counter back to the one technique. You guys always run into the three technique. Why is that? Or hey, we do counter tray with the guard and the backside tight end. You guys do it with the guard and the tackle. Well, aren't you worried about this backside guy here crashing? Well, yeah, we are. That's why we do this with it. Oh, okay, cool. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah, I think we can add that. But you already have the counter tray concept built in. You're just it's a wrinkle to it, right? There's no pass plays you need to add necessarily. There's always stuff you're going to add. I saw the Rams do this concept with McVay, and I think we could add that because we already kind of do something similar, and we have this type of personnel, and we'd have to tinker it a little bit, but I really like that. You're going to add little things like that. Everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't need to revolutionize your offense. It's take what you have, and it's just shifting your emphasis from one thing to another. And that's the thing that makes me encourage that this could happen quickly. And I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about LSU and Notre Dame, and guy made a good point. He's like, look, LSU was successful because they had 3 first-round draft pick caliber players at receiver, and they had Joe Burrow's number overall pick and a first-round player at receiver. And I said, yeah, you're right. And I said, number one, I'm not saying Notre Dame should have to score 49 points a game. Number two, in 2018, none of those guys looked like first-round picks.
Right.
Because they ran an offense that was not conducive to playing to their talents. They go bring in Joe Brady, they'd shift their offense, they build around that talent, and all of a sudden – these guys that average 32 points a game. I mean, Joe Burrow put up Jack Cohn numbers in 2018. He put up Jack Cohn numbers in 2018, okay? He put up Ian Book 2020 numbers in 2018. A year later, he has the most dynamic season a quarterback has ever had in college football history.
Right.
Same guy, same talent, same everything.
Right.
But they revolutionized their offense. Notre Dame doesn't have to do that, in my opinion. They just have to shift an emphasis. And if they do that, I think you're going to see this team get up to that 38 to 42 points per game that they're capable of being. If they just get better on red zone, I did this number, Vince. If Notre Dame had the same touchdown red zone percentage last year that they had in 2019, they would have scored 38 points a game. Not more red zone trips, not just touchdown ratio.
Just more success.
That's 38 points per game. Okay, well then now what do you do to get that 38 to then get it to 42 and 43? So red zone success is going to take you part of the way, right? As long as you maintain your good third down percentage and those kind of things. To that next level, you have to then say, okay, now what do we do to not just build in the third down success and the red zone success, but now can we do to become a more explosive offense? So the red zone piece will get Notre Dame part of the way, right? No doubt. But then it's about creating a more explosive offense, which then gets you to that another 4 or 5 points that you need. But more importantly, it gets you to the point where now you can threaten Alabama, you can threaten Clemson, you can threaten those teams offensively to where you can keep your defense in the game long enough for them to go out and make – because here's the thing. Notre Dame has not been in the game yet where their defense could win it or lose it in the second half in these moments. I want to see what their defense can do in those moments. Make that stop. We saw it against Clemson. The one time they've been in that situation – well, really two. The defense really gave them plenty – in recent seasons, and I'm talking like the last 3-4 years.
Sure.
The defense gave Notre Dame's offense chance after chance after chance in the fourth quarter against Georgia in 2019. To the point where on the last Georgia drive of the game, the defense pinned Georgia back so bad, forced Georgia to punt, gave the offense the ball with about 2 minutes left in Georgia territory. You can't ask for anything better than that, right? Clemson, LSU, 2019 LSU, Alabama, Oklahoma, Ohio State, those teams are taking that ball and they're going right down there, putting it in the end zone and winning the ball game. Notre Dame couldn't. They didn't even get a field goal attempt. I mean, they couldn't kick a field goal because they didn't get a first down.
Yeah.
And then you look at last year, in my opinion, the offense gave the defense a chance, right? Well, the defense gave the offense a chance late. People forget that. If Clemson gets one first down late in the game, it's ball game. Remember, I mean, because Notre Dame got the ball back late in the game, but if that's because the defense came up with stops, Clemson had to punt. Right. And so, and then you look at overtime, the offense let's get in overtime. Let's see what our defense can do. And the defense made the plays.
They did.
Right. And the offense, so that's the thing is the defense can win you some games if your offense can keep you in it. That's going to be the key. Can the offense keep them in those big games? And that's what I'm excited to see, Vince, this year is I think that this is what the Notre Dame offense can be. What they're capable of, and I'm hoping that we're going to – personnel's there. You said it earlier. The personnel, in our opinion, is there. There's a lot of athletes on the field for Notre Dame this year. A lot of guys can do damage in some of the situations that we talked about. Now it's about, are you going to put them in position to allow them to be that successful? So, Vince, that is going to be it for this portion of the podcast. Don't go anywhere because we're not done yet, okay? This is just for this part of the podcast. We're going to do a quick Football 101, and then we're going to dive into – some questions. So if you're listening via podcast, obviously, thank you for listening. Look for the second parts of the show later. If you're listening on YouTube, then just hang with us for a second and we're going to get right to that stuff. But before you leave, make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when our show is going to be up, and share this with your friends. And of course, sign up for the Irish Breakdown message boards because those are rocking and rolling. You're going to see those down there at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Vince.
Yes, we're going
to do a little bit of Football 101, right? So
we got it.
Today on our Football 101, we're going to talk about gaps and line alignments, line numbering.
Yes. This is important because and I remember when I first became a football coach, there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of terminology, right? And there's a lot of guys out there, that think that they know all the jargon and the terminology that are in our profession, right, Brian? So it's important because when we're talking about recruiting, for example, we talk about, this kid will be a great 3 technique. This kid will be a great 1 technique or even a 0, that kind of a thing. What the heck does that even mean? That's why we wanted to do this one. And this may be common knowledge to some people, but this is going to be enlightening to other people. I remember when the light bulb went off when I was in high school, when the coaches actually explained what the gaps were. I was like, so that's what you meant. Okay. So that's why we decided to do it. And again, this is a very simple Football 101, but I think it is also a very important Football 101. So go ahead, Brian. I'll let you take it from here.
So this is a game from Pitt, Notre Dame Pitt. Okay. And we're just going to do it real quickly. So number 1, the space between the guard and the center to both sides is called the A gap. Okay. The guard between the space between the guard and tackle is called a B gap. All right. And we'll explain why these matter. If there is a tight end, the space between the tackle and the tight end is a C gap. Or actually, the gap outside of the tackle is also a C gap. So you have a C gap on both sides. Here's where you get a little bit different. If there's a tight end, there can then be a D gap. Okay. And now that matters because if you tell a running back that we're going to run to the C gap on the boundary side, that would be, remember, boundary. Okay. Here's the hash. Remember from last football 101. This is the boundary. This is the field. Okay. So if you say, hey, we're running a boundary run and you need to attack the C gap because you want this ball to get outside, okay, it's going to look a whole lot different than if you say we're trying to get to the C gap on the field side because the field gap to the C side, to the field side, the C gap to the field side is going to be in between tackle and tight end. Now it would be the D gap that you'd want to get outside. So that's why those things are important. Okay. Now here's a couple other reasons, Vincent. Chime in anytime you want to. So here's why these letters and such. Here's how they can be utilized. Okay. Number one, from a defensive standpoint, you have gap responsibilities. Okay.
Yes.
So for example, this linebacker right here, based on a certain call, you may say, hey, look, your job is you have B gap, strong side, right? If it's run to you, you have A gap away if it's a run away from you, or A gap backside. So if it's a run here, so let's say Notre Dame just runs straight downhill, right? Little counter. He's got his response to B gap. So he's got to know I got to protect that gap because this guy's doing C gap, this guy's got the A gap, and then some kind of safety is going to come down here for run support. So if he goes into the A gap, then there's nobody in the B gap, and that play is going to be gone. Or if he goes A gap, and then he goes B gap, and then now nobody has C gap, right? So number one, you look at it that way. Well, then if it's run away, he knows he has, for example, okay, your fit is you have A weak. Well, if Notre Dame's running outside zone here, he knows he has to have the A gap weak. Well, here's the A gap strong. Here's the A gap weak. So he's going to, say he slants there. He's got to know he's got to protect that. It's essentially you're the cutback. What you can't do if you're that linebacker is you can't start flowing across and all of a sudden this guy gets eaten up and they get washed down and then you overflow. And now all of a sudden Notre Dame is cutting right back into that A gap because Notre Dame's linemen are going to be working side to the side. Does that make sense? So or it could be, hey, we're going to be here and then you're fitting over top. If it's a stunt, right? If it's a blitz, okay. On this particular blitz, you're the linebacker. We're going to run a stunt where he's going to go A weak and you're going to go A minus. So the way that we would describe it when we were breaking it down is if we're breaking down as an offensive coach, we're breaking down a defensive blitz. So let's say this is the Mike. We would go M minus A. Okay. That meant that this guy was going A gap weak, right? Or we would say M plus A if he was going to, we'd go M plus A. So we know the Mike is blitzing the A gap to the strong side as we define the strong side, okay? So that's how you kind of figure out what they're going to be. And then, of course, so you're identifying that offensively, and then they're also identifying that defensively, okay? The other thing is this isn't as specific, but you have certain runs that you want to hit certain spots. Now, zone runs don't really have gaps, okay, as far as where the back is going. Where zone runs have gaps, responsibility with the line. So the communication is if this is what we talked about last week, is there's uncovered and uncovered rules. So this guard right here, Aaron Banks, he's uncovered. He doesn't have anyone lined up on him either side. Jarrett Patterson is covered. So if Notre Dame was running inside zone here, they would communicate and they would be blocking together to get to the second level. And then these two guys are going to block together to get to the second level. Okay. Now the running back's just going to hit the open hole. And then they would end up either blocking here, depending on which linebacker presented himself. Okay. So if this guy crashed over here and this guy crashed over here, they would end up taking this linebacker. Right. So it's about working on that first level up to the second level. They know that these two guys have to protect they are responsible for A gap players. Okay, so if this guy slants across the center's face, Aaron Banks knows, okay, that gap is now secure. I got to then work up to the second level or look for a second level defender. Okay, so that's why gaps can be important there, is just communication of, hey, here's where we're going to go. You normally, Vince, don't give running backs gaps to hit because they don't stay there. They move.
Right. You give them tracks.
Yeah.
It's like the
out.
So the track, what we would say is,
quick,
okay,
let's say we're going to run stretch to the boundary. Okay, Vince. So we'll go that way. So we're going to stretch here to the boundary. Okay.
Yep. So you'd be aiming for either the outside cheek of the guard or the inside cheek of the tackle. Okay. So depending on where you want that track to be, right? So you're going off of a body part, frankly, of one of the linemen, because the linemen are going to move, right?
Right.
And so
stay on that.
You stay on that track.
Here.
That's right.
So if you're running the inside cheek of the tackle,
right,
he goes out here, you're still pushing towards his inside cheek. You don't push towards his inside cheek where he lined up.
Right, because now you're on the inside cheek of the guard, probably, because everybody's shifted over that direction. Yeah,
correct.
So you stay on your track, and that you'll hear running backs coaches and offensive coordinators talk about the running backs track all the time, because it is so important for them to stay on track, because they can screw everything up. Right. They can screw absolutely everything up because, okay, so let's say his track is the inside cheek of the tackle, right, and now, but he's going to follow where the grass is for that, right? So the problem is he's going to end up getting tackled by a backside player who has shifted over with the line, and a guy that isn't a point of attack. So you're not necessarily worried about him from an offensive line standpoint. And the running back is not following his track. Well, now he's going to get tackled by a guy that's not even supposed to be in the neighborhood of the play. Right. And that's on the running back. That's not on the offensive line. That's on the running back for not staying on his track. So that's why it's so important.
Right. So you teach them, here's your track, and then what your read. Okay. Your read is essentially you're going to, so your read is going to basically be the defend. You're going to be reading the tackle's block. So here, based on how wide this guy is, you understand there's a good chance that we're not going to reach him. So you're going to block that. This ends up becoming a drive block outside, and you're going to stretch it as far as you can until you get that vertical insertion point, right? Yep. But if you lose track of that and you try to stretch outside and this guy hasn't blocked, and then you just bounce it outside because you went too wide, you attacked his outside hip.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you're going to run right into the arms of the defender.
Right.
And so those are why those things are important. Now the other part is looking at it from a line. So that's from a offense and defensive standpoint. The other piece of it is looking at it from a line numbering. Now, I've never had anyone do anything other than A, B, C, and D gaps. This you can actually get a little bit of a difference. So head up over the nose is a 0. Now, here's Vince where it can get interesting. So I have seen it this way where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, right? Am I kind of on point there so far? Yeah.
Okay.
And then they'll call this a 4-eye.
Yeah.
And they'll call this.
Yeah.
So 4 is, let's see here. 4 is head up, 5 is outside. And they'll call this a 7. I've seen that, which makes no sense to me.
That makes zero
sense. Or
sense.
I've seen it make a 6-eye.
A 6-eye, I've heard.
Yeah. Right. And so meaning inside. Now,
right.
I've seen it also where people make it kind of make a little bit more sense. And it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right.
7,
8, 9.
Yes.
Right. Now, I've seen other people that'll do this, Vince, is they'll go 0 and a 1 there. So the 1 technique is actually the shade.
Yeah.
Then it's 2-eye, 2,
right.
3.
Right. I've seen that one a lot.
4-eye, 5, right? 4-eye.
And then 4.
4, 5, right? So you'll see it differently. People do it differently. So what we'll try to do is we'll just try to keep it as simple as possible.
Right.
We'll just go 0, shade, 1, 2, 3, right? And then here's the interesting. I've never seen anyone go like this. Me personally, I've never been on an offense like that.
Yeah.
Where I've always, and I don't know why, it's because also as part of it, what did you grow up on? Mm-hmm. I've always seen 1, 2, 3 that way. So you tell me which way you want to go, Vince. I've seen this 4-eye,
mm-hmm.
and then 4, and then 5 is what I've always seen.
Yeah, that's what I've seen as well.
So, and then
because 5 always ends up being a shade. 5 isn't head up, and if you were going by the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then 5 is head up, and 5 has always been a shade to me.
Right. That's kind of how I learned it. To be honest with you, is that
Which
way.
makes no sense whatsoever. But
Right.
it is what it is.
It doesn't. But that's what I always. That's what the most of the teams I coached on were.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing backside. It's just. It's the same thing backside.
Right.
So this would be some people call it a 1. We'll call it a shade.
Yeah. I've always called it a 1, but a shade is totally fine.
3. That guy's in a 3.
Mm-hmm.
This guy is in a 7. And this guy is in a basically. We'd still call that a 9 technique because of how wide he is.
Because he's so wide. That's right.
Right.
He's not connected to any of the offensive linemen in any way. So he's a 9. He's outside. Yeah.
Now, what I've seen a lot of people do, Vince, I'm curious what you do, is they would call these linebackers 30s. So the 0 stands for linebacker, but it's basically where's the linebacker line. So he's technically, they're both lined up on the outside shoulder of the guard, which is a 3 technique for the line, but because it's a linebacker, they call it a 30.
Interesting. Okay. I've never heard that before.
Yep. And then that's how and so then if he's lined up inside here, it would be 10.
Right.
And then if he was head up, it'd be 20.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I've seen a lot of people do as far as where was the linebacker? He was in a 30.
Yeah.
Because how else do you how did you guys describe that?
It was more English than anything else. It was like he was head up on me, coach. He was my inside eye. He was my outside eye, outside shoulder. Yeah. It was just more English than anything else.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a way where we could kind of identify quickly. Sure. Hey, where's the mic? The mic was in a 10.
Yeah.
He was in a 0. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that allowed us to have kind of quick communication and be able to kind of show people, hey, and the reason that's important is here's why this is important. Okay. It's important because
especially in a zone scheme.
You need to be able to discuss who has who.
Right.
Okay. So now an offensive line won't say, hey, coach, he was in a 3 technique. What they do is they have covered, uncovered.
Mm-hmm.
Right. All right. So if I'm running inside zone this way, okay, you say this guy's covered, right? He is uncovered. He is covered. These two guys. Technically, these guys are both uncovered, but I'd call him covered, and I'd call him uncovered because he's tight enough to where you almost want to count him as there.
Sure.
Right. So then that determines who's working with who. So if he's uncovered, you're gonna do one of 2 things, okay? You can work here to here, okay, and then you're gonna work here to here, and then you can work here to here.
Yep,
okay,
that's what I would do.
And essentially,
the guy on the end is the read man.
Well, I wouldn't even read that, Vince. He's so
just
wide.
Leave him alone? Okay.
Yeah, he's so wide.
It's an inside zone.
We're gonna bend this thing back inside.
Okay.
We're not bouncing this outside.
Gotcha.
Now, here's the key though. If you're a team that can see, some teams will bounce an inside zone. Some teams won't. Like the way that I taught inside zone, we never bounce it from the gun. We may bounce it from an I formation because it would be a different kind of thing. I would actually run more mid zone that way.
Gotcha.
But an inside zone, in my opinion, it's never going to bounce unless they just crash. It's not designed to bounce. So this guy is going to stay out here because if this guy's crashing all day, there's so many things we can do to him.
Sure.
And that's not how Pitt played. Now, so that's what you can do, but you can. I did that poorly. You don't down block there on an inside zone. You power step here and you power step there, so you're both kind of working to that level. If this guy crashes, then you can take him that way. But that would be kind of how you're going to work because you're not technically working to a specific linebacker. You're working to the linebacker that flashes. That's what you would do. And so that's kind of how I would do it. But basically, you're going to work with covered, uncovered rules, essentially. So there's no A gap, B gap necessarily involved in that. You could discuss it. You could say, hey, look, this guy was in my A gap, B gap. But normally you discuss it covered, uncovered. He was in a shade. He was in a 3. He was in a whatever.
And so, and just because we're talking about, zone play and we're going to do a 101 on zone play, but I feel like I want to say this. So if we're talking about the guard, the center, and Banks. Okay. So those are the 2 guys. They're working together on this defensive lineman, and they're responsible most likely for 36. Okay. Now, there's 2 different things 36 can do. He can come straight down, or he can kind of flow over the top to go to the opposite A gap, if, depending on how he reads this play. Okay.
Right. And what he views his responsibility is.
And yes. And this is why it is so important for communication on the offensive line. Okay. Because those 2 guys are going to be double teaming the defensive tackle, the 1 technique. Okay. If he comes straight down, well, Banks is going to come off and he's going to take that linebacker, right? And he's going to once that double team is secure, now he's going to come off and he's going to go get that linebacker. Well, if that linebacker scrapes over the top, well, now Patterson is breaking off the double team, and he's going to go get the linebacker. So that's why it's so important not only to communicate.
Banks has to stay on this block.
Exactly.
Right here.
Exactly. And so not only is it important for those guys to communicate how they're starting the play, but throughout the play, who's coming off, you, me, or or stay, go, whatever they're using, whatever terminology they're using, it is so important because it can change play to play if you're running the exact same play, because it just depends on what the defense is doing. And so it's so important also that they have their eyes up while they're blocking, because they can't lose sight of where that linebacker goes, because that guy is their responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to point that out. Again, we're going to talk about that when we talk about zone reads and things of that nature. But people talk about why communication is so important on the offensive line. And I just want to make sure that people understand this is one of the reasons why it is so important.
Mm-hmm. And that's going to do it for today's Football 101. Talk line numbering and gaps, obviously, and we finally got this figured out. So we'll hopefully it continues being good, and it's not one day it's good and the next day it stinks.
Yeah,
so that's going to be it for Football 101. So Vince, let's dive into questions.
Okay,
so let's
I'm on it.
We got a lot of people asking questions, so let's dive into that.
Which is awesome. I love the fight back and forth between some of the guys about who was first into the room. That's pretty awesome. Okay.
Did you see my response, by the way?
Technically, you were first, and technically, I was second. So there you go. All right. Patrick McGrain has the first question. He says, pre-podcast off topic, if A&M, Nebraska, etc., left the Big 12 to get away from Texas, any chance they all go back to the Big 12? And personally, I would love to see some defections from the SEC, also from the Big 10, to go back to the Big 12 to kind of get the band
Missouri
back together
and A&M
again.
leaving the SEC, and then but I think Texas A&M showed their cowardice today when they voted at 14-0 for Texas and Oklahoma.
Did they officially vote? I didn't see that. Okay.
Yep. They voted today. It was 14-0, which means it's just whatever. Like there's no, because then hey, you know what? You can go back to the Big 12, and here's how much money you'd make. Here's how much money you're going to make playing for us. So it's all cowardice. It's all about money.
Exactly. That's disappointing, because I would have, I would have loved to see Texas A&M step up and be like, hey, Arkansas, hey, Missouri, let's go. Let's go back to the Big 12. Come to us.
Because here's the thing: Big 10 hates Nebraska right now.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
They had all those issues last year with COVID and all those kind of things. The Big 10's basically just screwing Nebraska now, giving them super hard schedules every year.
Yep.
And if I'm Nebraska, I'd say, look, you don't want us here. We don't want to be here. We're bouncing. Right. All of a sudden, A&M, Missouri, Arkansas, and Nebraska go to the Big 12, and there you go. The problem is it'll never happen, because they would all have to take $10+ million cuts to make that move. Plus, there'd probably be buyouts involved.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's not going to happen.
It's all about the money, and now the SEC is a super conference, and here we go.
That's the reality of it.
Right. That's exactly right. Nolan, loving the topic today. Thanks, Nolan. We enjoyed it as well. I love the philosophical talk. That's one of my favorite things to talk about. Mike Gardner says, I just watched some of Cohn's highlights at Wisconsin. I was really impressed by his ability to scan the field and snap the ball downfield. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what we've been trying to tell everybody. Thank you, Mike, for checking out film and backing up what we've been telling everybody from the get-go. And frankly, not necessarily Notre Dame fans, but you guys are educated. You guys understand it. But from a national standpoint, it's like this Jack Cohn fella was a backup who, grad transferred over to Notre Dame, and, he doesn't have a track record, and he just wanted to get out of Dodge.
Or they went to the Rose Bowl in spite of him.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
the other way that it feels like some people think.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. But yes, thanks, Mike, for pointing that out, because you are absolutely correct. They're talking about somebody said Nebraska isn't. Oh, Tommy Gunn said Nebraska isn't in the Big 12. And then Patrick says, I know, but would they leave the Big 10 to go back to the Big 12? Yeah, probably not.
Yeah. Old Tommy Guns jumped the gun a little bit on that one and misread the question. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see, like, here's the ultimate. So, like, I don't care about Arkansas. I actually would not bring Arkansas. Arkansas was never in the Big 8 in the past. They were in the Southwest Conference.
Sure.
Now, a lot of Southwest teams went to the Big 8, but to me, the originals are. I'd love to see Nebraska and A&M come back. And A&M wasn't part of the Big 8, I don't believe either. I think they were also in the Southwestern Conference, but they're a premier program. I would rather see, to me, the ideal scenario would be Missouri and Texas A&M went back to the Big 12, and then they went and got Nebraska and Colorado to get back to 12. I would rather see that than Arkansas, just because Arkansas feels more like an SEC program.
I agree. Arkansas doesn't feel like a Big 12 program.
Yeah, and they never. I don't think they ever were in the Big. They were never ever in the Big 12 because their departure to the South. I believe when they left the Southwest Conference, I'm going to check that out. But
all right,
when they left the Southwest Conference, which forced some teams to join the Big 8, became the Big 12 because of they adopted some of those Southwest Conference teams. So they were. I don't believe they were ever in the Big 8. Yes, they were an independent. From 1894 to 1914, that's when most teams were independent. And then they were in the Southwest Conference from 1915 to 1991, and then joined the SEC in 1992.
Yeesh.
So, yep.
Okay, let's see here. We've got, D. McNally. CBS Sports has announced C.G. Williams will announce on August 7th. I believe this.
I'm going to give you a shot to redo this one.
Oh, McAnally. Right? McAnally. See, I messed it up, but last time.
It's okay.
I apologize. But yeah, he says CJ Williams will announce on August 7th. I believe this has to be good for the Irish.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, I would hope so. It's my anniversary, so it's got to be good.
I've said Irish all summer, if he decides this summer, I feel really good about where things stand for Notre Dame.
Bingo bongo.
I haven't changed my opinion of that.
D-Rock says Notre Dame offense averaged 33.4 points per game last year, and that was with conservative play calling and putting the foot off the gas pedal. Yes, Coach Reese, aggressive and efficient. Need it this year. Agreed.
Yeah, I would say a little bit, though. I wouldn't necessarily say they did all that with an aggressive, because I think, number one, you have to consider the fact that they scored basically 10 defensive points against Clemson and had 2 touchdowns in overtime.
Sure.
So I mean, they only scored 23 regulation points on offense. I mean, 26 technically, but I mean, one scoring drive, they had negative yards of offense because of the fumble.
Right.
So I mean, that to me plays a little bit into that.
Sure.
It kind of adds to it. You had a defensive touchdown against Pitt. Well, basically, had the defense set up 3 touchdowns basically against Pitt, essentially. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the offense scored 33.4 points per game in spite of, because of this, and this. I mean, he's correct. I just would add a little bit of an asterisk to it that
a little context.
Some of that, yeah, like they scored 52 against South Florida, who stinks, but one of them was a special teams touchdown. I mean, they had an abnormal number of scores on things other than offense, and they had, like I said, they had 14 points in overtime against Clemson. So
sure.
Yeah.
Michael Gacio says, how important do you feel a more aggressive approach on special teams can contribute to Notre Dame's overall explosiveness? BK needs to insist on difference makers making plays on special teams, punts especially.
You want to take a shot at that, Vince? Because I have a very strong opinion on this.
No. Do I want them to be more aggressive on special teams? Absolutely. I just don't know that it's going to happen. And they have the personnel to make it happen. I think that they can make it happen. I think that it can absolutely benefit the offense. I just feel like I don't know that we're going to get both in the same year. I don't know if we're going to get both an aggressive special teams and the changed philosophy on offense all at the same time, because I feel like that's almost too good to be true. So maybe this is my pessimistic side, like coming forward. Like I'm feeling really good about where the offense is right now, and I feel like if I ask for too much, Santa Claus isn't going to give it to me. So I'm going to stick with the offense.
I'm going to say it's very important and it's needed. It needs to go hand in hand, in my opinion. I think that Notre Dame's special teams philosophy has been very similar to their offensive philosophy. Conservative, don't make a mistake. And I'm all about not making mistakes. I don't want to make mistakes, but I think sometimes you can so paralyze yourselves and your players that about not making mistakes that you just don't take any chances. And I think we saw that a little bit at quarterback in recent seasons. And I'm not just talking about Ian Book. I think that's kind of partly what happened to Brandon Wimbush. And sometimes that can then force you into mistakes because,
Sure.
I mean, so it's just, whatever. I wouldn't say that an aggressive approach on special teams can contribute to explosiveness because it's not necessarily the same thing. What I think aggressiveness can do can lead to you having a really dynamic scoring offense because you're going to do certain things. And there was a comment that Liam Gaming made, a good field position by the D could be a big help as well. But I would argue that it's not the defense that gives you good field position except when they're forcing a turnover. It's the special teams that gives you good field position.
Right.
So, you could pin a team at the 15-yard line and they got a punt, but if they're getting a net 40+ yard punt, then your impact on special teams is great. But, if you have an aggressive special teams, for example, and hey, they know that we're coming after them, they're going to do one of two things. They're going to quickly get a punt off, or B, they're going to max protect a little bit more.
Sure.
Which then gives us a chance to maybe set up a return, or the aggressiveness, right? The aggressiveness can allow him to maybe kick a line drive punt, and instead of now all of a sudden we're getting the ball to 45-yard line instead of the 30. That's a positive. That's a win. And so I don't know if special teams necessarily contributes to that. I mean, in regard to even a great year on special teams is going to net you what, 2 or 3 touchdowns. Maybe 3 or 4 at the end of the year. That's not moving the needle from a pure point standpoint. But to his point, I think if you're really aggressive on special teams, it's going to set up opportunity for you to score more points. And it's also the one part of it that is good is the coverage, because if you're consistently pinning teams deep with your coverage, which Notre Dame has been exceptional at in recent years,
yes, absolutely,
then you're going to be a lot more effective from the standpoint of scoring more points. Mm-hmm. I think those things tie together, so like if you're pinning teams deep and then your defense is good, then they're kicking consistently from kind of their deep territory, then you're going to have a lot more short fields. I've pointed this out once before, Vince, and I'll say it again. I was coaching at Muhlenberg College one year, and we averaged over 40 points per game going into the postseason, and then we scored 56 points in our first playoff game, most points we'd ever scored. We only averaged about 350 yards per game of offense that year. That's it. Because our average starting field position that year was the 48-yard, our own 48-yard line.
Wow.
Because we scored like 5 special teams touchdowns. We had a couple other touchdowns that were set up by short fields because our special teams was so good. But our defense was good at forcing turnovers, right? And that's to the point that Liam Gaming was talking about is your defense, picks a pass off. Like Notre Dame's offense was not great against Pitt. It wasn't great at all against Pitt. But they scored 45 points.
Yeah.
I mean, the offense averaged 5.2 yards per play. And that's inflated by the fact they had like a 75-yard touchdown pass. They had 2 long touchdown passes in that game, which helped to Ben Skoranek. But overall, they were very inefficient in that game. Well, why were they able to score so many points? Because defense and special teams gave them short fields. They had a block punt that game that set up a score. You remember that? Or no, they actually scored on special teams in that game. Correct? Didn't Foskey block a punt that game that they scored on? I'm going to look it up here real quick. But
your memory is way better than mine is.
It was like 14-3 late in the first half, and Notre Dame blocked the punt. So yes, it was 21-3. So here we go. Notre Dame had 2 big plays early. They had a 75-yard touchdown pass, a 34-yard touchdown pass, and a 73-yard touchdown pass. So 100 of your 434 yards were on 2 plays. It was 14-3. It was a score with less than 2 minutes left in the half. 14-3. Notre Dame picked off a pass, right? And let me see here. They picked off a pass. Let me go find second quarter. Where are we at? Okay, they Clemson got the ball at their Pitt got the ball at their their own 40-yard line. And they threw a pass. Bo Bauer picked it off and ran it back. So Notre Dame got the ball in Pitt territory, went down the field, scored with – trying to see how much time was left. scored with a minute 29 left in the half. Okay. Pitt gets the ball back. Brian Kelly, and this is some aggressiveness that I love. If you remember this, Vince, Brian Kelly calls a timeout to stop the clock with 20 seconds left. Now they're up 21-3. You could just let it play out. We're on the road. We're going to go into halftime up 20. Brian Kelly calls timeout to force Pitt to punt. What does he do? They go after it. Block the punt, recovered in the end zone. Now game's over. I mean, it's 28-3. You're winning. That's that to me, that's aggressive. That's being aggressive on special teams. And so we've seen Coach Kelly do that. Now it's like it's the final piece of the return game. So we've seen some aggressiveness from Brian Kelly on special teams and coverage and plays like this. Now it's about, okay, now that they know you're going to do that, if they know you're going to do that somewhat consistently, then they're going to be a little bit more fear. And that's how you kind of get your punters and to kind of shank some punts. And all of a sudden you have great field position. So so a game where you really had two big plays and that was it. I mean, you weren't doing anything on offense. A 14-3 game turns into a 28-3 game because of a turnover and a blocked punt. Right? I mean, so just like that, your offense hasn't done anything different, and you're up 28-3.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's how you look at it and say, yeah, those are things that can result in you scoring a lot of points. And you look at Notre Dame's second half touchdown drives. Notre Dame scored 45 points. They all came in the first three quarters. They didn't score a point in the fourth quarter. Their last two touchdown drives covered 49 and 35 yards. They were off turnovers. Remember, Nick McLeod had a pick, and then Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah had that pick on that wheel route. You remember that, where he went up and caught it. So all of a sudden, you're scoring a lot of points, and your offense isn't exactly moving. Imagine what Notre Dame could do if they had a defense and a special teams like that, but their offense was also more explosive. You're not only doing this to Pitt, you're doing this to everybody.
Yeah.
You're smashing people, and that's what has me excited about it.
Matt Romero wants to know, can you walk around Notre Dame campus right now? I think so. I don't see why you couldn't. Yeah, I've taken my son there. We've kicked field goals out on the field. So on the field's the north of campus. So yeah, you can walk around. I'm starting to like how every ranking and prediction for Notre Dame has them being 8-4 or 7-5. Just keep doubting us. I agree.
Don't, for the life of me, I do not get that.
I'm telling you, Brian, I've sat down and I've tried to figure out why 8-4, why 7-5, and I can't figure it out for the life of me. I cannot understand. I don't know, man. I just don't get it.
Yeah.
So, hey, keep doubting.
It's strange. I got one down here, Vince, from Michael Shea.
Okay.
So it's all about winning in the playoff with Notre Dame and BK. Notre Dame has been closing the gap since Bob Davie. It's time for Notre Dame to step up and win one. I'm going to disagree with that.
They haven't been closing the gap since Bob Davie.
Yeah, the gap widened when Ty Willingham was here, and Charlie Weiss did some things from a recruiting standpoint that helped close the gap, but then that was negated by what he did as a coach. Look, for the 3 years prior to Brian Kelly arriving, Notre Dame had a losing record. So I wouldn't consider that gap closed at all. I don't think the gap has really significantly been closed until the last 4 years. But the first part of what he said, I 100% agree with. You're at the point now where, okay, you've done all the other stuff. You've made the playoff twice. That's not a cool thing anymore, right? That's exactly. Okay. You've already shown you can do that. What are you going to do when you get there? It's time to win one of those. That's going to be the big thing, in my opinion.
Huron says, given our 1-2 punch at running back, how worried should we even be about the offensive line and the wide receivers? Isn't the whole point of great running backs is that you don't need a great offensive line for them to work? If you don't have a good offensive line in front of great running backs, it doesn't matter, right? Because you're going to get stoned. It
depends on your scheme. Yeah, I would say. Can I push back on that a little bit, Vince?
Sure.
I think for most of our lives that's been true. I think that the modern game somewhat, like, for example, would you consider North Carolina as having a great offensive line? I think they were kind of average.
Sure.
But the combination of great running backs and a great scheme, which involves RPOs, misdirection, it created more spacing. And so the offensive line was solid. But, I mean, if you just look at the numbers, I mean, why didn't North Carolina win the Joe Moore Award last year? Who else had 2,000-yard runners?
Yeah.
I think in modern football, you can protect. Now, you can't be bad on the offensive line. So I'm not saying that you can't, but like in 2018, I didn't think Notre Dame's line was very good, and they went 12-0. And I think they did things that year scheme-wise. Remember, they ran a lot of RPOs that year. We talked about this. There were times where Ian Book was like 9 of 10, 10 of 11 on RPO throws. And they did some of that stuff. And then once you space out, then all of a sudden Dexter Williams is ripping off a long run. And so I think that the modern game, and that's why RPOs are important, it can protect you from if you don't have a great line. And I think scheme-wise, you can do things. I think read zones negate that a little bit. RPOs negate that. Now, so I don't think you necessarily need, and this is why I'm not as worried about 2021 if Notre Dame makes the adjustments that we're talking about, because the way that the offense that Notre Dame ran last year, Vince, you're 1,000% correct. And I know it's not a real thing, but I'm saying it anyway. Okay.
I'll take it though.
You're 1,000% correct, because you can't win with that offensive system without a great offensive line. In theory, however, you don't need a great offensive line to win. And we've seen Clemson won 2 national titles with mediocre offensive lines. They did, right? LSU's offensive line, which was really good, supposedly really good in 2019, and it was not very good in 2018, in my opinion.
Right.
So I think the scheme can protect the line more so. And to Huron's point, I do think that running backs can do that, but it's not just running backs though. It's how you use the running backs. Because to Vince's point, he is right that if you have 2 great running backs and a bad offensive line, you're not going to be a great running team, just more often than not. You need other things schematically. You need a threat of the outside guys. You need receivers that can scare teams. Because if your O-line's not that good and your receivers don't scare people, I don't care who you have at running back. You're not running the ball.
Pack it up and back it up in the box. It's just like we talked about, right? I mean, you pack it up in the box, it's game over. So not only do you have to have decent receivers, you also have to have a quarterback willing to pull the trigger. And sometimes that can make average wide receivers better, right? I mean, it just can.
Or a quarterback that's not willing to pull the trigger can make 2 6'4" guys that run 4.42s not as effective in big games. Hypothetically speaking.
Of course, it's hypothetical. We've never seen that.
The last part too is I'm not really worried about the receiving core. I'm not.
Me neither.
One thing Dell Alexander has done a good job of throughout his career is by the time guys become seniors, they're pretty good.
Yeah, right.
And all the Davis, Austin, Lindsey, Keys, they're all seniors now.
They've been around. They've been around the program for a long time. Like it's time. I mean, it's absolutely time. So. I agree. And then Huron says, love you guys also. You're the best. So thanks for putting that out there.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate that big time. Tracy Tipton says, thumbs up, guys and gals. Great show as always. Richard Robinson. I feel like he's yelling at me with the caps, but I'm just saying.
He always does that. He does it on YouTube and on Facebook as well. It doesn't mean anything by it.
It's okay. I'm just like I'm like your dog at fireworks. Like I shudder, like I get yelled at like by my wife. I just,
It's like that scene from Wedding Crashers from that little kid runs up. He's like, make me a bicycle, funny man.
Come on, clown.
Why are you yelling at me? Shut up and do it, funny guy. Yeah, it's a hilarious scene. Love that movie.
It's great.
Why are you yelling at me?
I love that movie so much.
Richard is not. Richard's good.
I'm joking.
Good people.
But it says RPOs would make a big difference. When Lawrence returned for Clemson in the ACC title game, it opened up running lanes for ETN. With our running backs, it would make the offense explosive.
I would say I don't know if it was RPOs that made Clemson more dangerous with Trevor Lawrence. I'm going to somewhat disagree there. It was the fact that Trevor Lawrence could run. Because they ran RPOs against Notre Dame the first game and had some success with it. The difference was DJ Uiagalelei, he was not going to run.
Yeah.
Whereas Trevor Lawrence is going to run. And he did a couple times early, pulled the ball and ran, had a long touchdown run. When you have that and you're running RPOs, it makes your offense incredibly hard to stop. Notre Dame won't be doing that because Jack Cohn is a good player. He ain't doing that. Now, if Tyler Buckner ever takes over, different story. Because if you can run read zone and RPOs, that's going to make you really hard to defend. But you're not. But you can live without a read zone nowadays because of RPOs. And
Nolan wants to know if we've heard anything about Kevin Austin and if he's full go for the season.
I mean, last we heard was Brian Kelly's comments. What was it? Vince said his little
last time he talked
golfing
was at his
thing,
golf outing.
right?
Yeah, right.
Sounds like he's on pace to be 100% by the time the season starts, but not when fall camp starts, which means he won't be fully in the flow. I don't see Kevin Austin playing 65 snaps in the opener. I just want him to be full speed and eventually work
Taking
up to
slow with him is the way to go, especially the way that the season plays out as far as the schedule. If you throw him in too early, he gets hurt again, he's out for the rest of the season. So slow playing him, I am totally fine with. Let me be real clear on that. So do you want to jump into all these teams to different conferences and all that?
It's just so many rumors. Who knows what's going on with it?
I agree. I just wanted to check.
I love this one from Chile. What's up, IB Nation? Brian Drizzy and my cousin Vinny. That's great. That's great.
Yes, it is.
I watched that again the other day. I've seen that movie
Vinny?
probably 30 times, and I laugh on that. Did you say Utes?
I don't know what I said. Utes? I don't know.
Huh? Youths.
OC Irish fan says, good Monday, gentlemen. Assuming the offense does what you've been discussing, how much do they unveil in the first game versus Florida State?
Well, I think they're going to go into the Florida State game with just all guns blazing. Whatever they feel they have to do to beat Florida State. I don't think this is the kind of opponent. And look, we've said we're not high on Florida State yet. I think they're still a year away from really contention. I have them going 6-6 to 7-5 this year. You know, it's going to be improved, but they're not going to look like the Florida State of old this year.
Yeah.
But they're still a good enough opponent to where you can't just say, hey, we're going to run 25% of offense because we don't want to show the rest of the teams. Teams rarely do that, honestly, when they're playing Power 5 opponents. You're going to see Notre Dame come out and be who they are and run their stuff. Now, there may be a trick play they're holding for Purdue or something like that, but for the you're going to see if they're going to run tempo, you're going to see them run tempo. If they're going to be running RPOs, you're going to see them running RPOs. You're going to see a lot of that right away because that's a game you can't just show up and roll the ball out and win that game. You got to play well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about the way we believe the offense is going to run, it's not a matter of, oh, there's some plays we're going to hold back. There's some things. An RPO philosophy is you're running. I mean, that's what you run. You know what I mean? It's not like you've got plays that you're not going to run. It's more of a flow offense. It's this is what we're doing, and you're doing what the defense gives you, and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's going to be some wrinkles and some things that they're not necessarily going to put out there. But I think it's going to be, like you said, I think they're going to run the offense the way that they would run the offense in Game 8. You know what I mean, or whatever, as the season progresses. I mean, there's no point in just coming out and being vanilla because that's not good for this team. There's too many. Let me put it this way: there's too many pieces that you're breaking in to be big time parts of this offense to try to go too vanilla. In my opinion, you know, you have to go with it.
Hey, Vince, I just got a text from a source of mine who's been pretty accurate about this stuff in the past. And he said that Kevin right now is a full go in workout. So like he is not being held back. And now, again, I don't think that means he's going to look this kind of injury. You don't put a guy out the first day of pads on and have him run, the same amount of reps you would if he wasn't injured. But from what I'm told,
ease him into it. Yeah.
In summer workouts, there's nothing he's not doing. Workload wise, all that kind of stuff. So if that's accurate, and this source is someone I've trusted in the past, and I wouldn't be saying what he told me if he hadn't been accurate in the past, someone I trust. So he and he's also someone who had given me some info on Kevin Austin not being 100% a year ago, and he wasn't. We found out later that he wasn't. So so that's a little bit of a nugget. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Nolan, this has been a tough week for the, quote, Notre Dame is irrelevant crowd. Everyone is screaming Notre Dame needs to be in a conference, not bad for a program nobody cares about.
Yeah.
I find that funny.
It is kind of funny. It's like these people, they want to – if Notre Dame doesn't matter, then why do you care if Notre Dame's independent or not?
Exactly.
I mean, and it's like every time there's conference realignment, all these fans that are like, your conference doesn't matter. They're always like, well, you need to join a conference. Which one? Ours. Okay, well, if we don't matter, why do you want us in your conference?
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's kind of hilarious. I got D-Rock down here has got one, Vince. 1, RPOs, check. 2, expand formations and packages, check. 3, schematically, more motion routes, check. Bingo, Brian. Indy has the personnel and depth to do it. Let it rip. And I think he's absolutely correct. I mean,
I feel like he was taking notes like this was a master class.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yep. That is awesome.
Yeah. So, and then by the way, there's no one committed today. So there's a discussion at least that I know of. I don't know that anyone's committed. I've kind of done a little bit of looking. I don't see anyone that had committed. So I don't think that's going on right now. Let's see this. Bruce Scherer. Don't want it to happen. But if Brian Kelly were to have an illness or injury and be out for an extended time, who would be the interim head coach? My guess would be Mike Elston. Now, technically,
as well.
Brian Polian's the associate head coach, but I would be shocked if Brian Kelly put Brian Polian in charge of this program. That would not be received well by a lot of people.
Yeah, and yes, I agree. I don't see how it wouldn't be Elston. I mean, he's the most senior guy. He's the guy that's been with Brian Kelly,
and he's best capable of doing it. I mean, he commands more respect.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think you're down a lot further than I am.
Yep. Andrew Goss says spacing makes more favorable matchups and better run lanes. Yes, it does, 100%. Now, spacing isn't the only way. You can also create running lanes with numbers, and that's a lot of times what 12 personnel brings to you. Depending on how you use it, Vince, you can gain a leverage or a numbers advantage on one side. And it doesn't have to be at the snap. A lot of times it's, you line up with the tight end, balanced tight ends, but then you pull 2 guys to that 3-man side, and all of a sudden now you have numbers. So you can create spacing that way, but I've always felt the best way to create spacing, especially in a zone scheme, the best way to create run lanes in a zone concept is with spacing.
Right.
And there's multiple ways to get that. But yes, I do think that is very important in my opinion.
While we were doing the football 101, I assume that is when this came through. Larry says, much like freshman year, I got lost in a 101 course.
Sorry about that, Larry.
This makes me laugh.
Yeah. D-Rock's got one down here, Vince.
I see that. Yep.
If you want to go ahead and read that one.
You got it. It says I may have missed this, but any word on Sebo's status for the season? If not, when do you think we will hear about his status with Notre Dame? I see.
My understanding is he's good to go.
Yeah. I completely forgot about that whole situation. Yeah. I was like, wait, what's wrong with Sebo?
Don't hold me to that, but the latest intel I got was that there's not going to be any punishment from a game standpoint. I think he's going to have some internal punishment, and I don't believe this is something that's been an issue for Sebo in the past. And that's usually taken into account when these kind of things happen. Is this kid been in trouble before?
Right.
I don't know of any other instances where Sebo's gotten in trouble. So I think that he made a mistake. There's going to be consequences, but not every consequence should or will be games, in my opinion. That's just my 2 cents. I think that's it, Vince. I think we are. I think we're good to go.
I think so too.
Yeah. So look, it's been a fun show. I appreciate y'all joining us. I think this was a good way to kick off the week. We'll be back again tomorrow, Vince, 1:00. We'll talk more Notre Dame football. Make sure that you give us a like before you leave. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you hit the notifications bell, share our podcast or our videos with people. If you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. And please sign up for the Irish Breakdown message boards. And if you have already signed up, you're paying money to be on the message boards. Let's talk, right? Let's engage things. Ask questions, right? Don't be afraid to I don't know if I want to ask. You're paying money to be on our site. That means you're paying to have access to us. Especially me, because I don't have 5 kids and another job. This is my job. So Vince isn't always going to be there. But ask questions. And look, to be honest with you, on the message board, I'm going to be a little bit more prone to give certain intel that I wouldn't in a public forum. So bring it up. Just bring it up. Let's talk. Let's discuss. Let's dive into all these types of things and really get this bad boy going. So we're excited to do that. But for Vince Dodaro and Brian Driscoll, everybody have a great, safe rest of your day. Had a lot of good feedback about the World War II, although one customer said he was upset with us because he didn't listen to the podcast until late on Friday. And so by the time he got done listening to our 4-hour podcast, he was so fired up, he went and watched like 2 hours worth of World War II movies. So he went to bed really late, and then he was kind of lethargic on Saturday. So that was put on us.
That's
So
great.
I will own that. I'll
take it
apologize
too.
for that. And I did tee up on Amazon Prime that Man in the High Castle or whatever it is. I am going to try to watch that a little bit this week, see if I like it or not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm going to like it, to be honest with you, but
first season's really
we'll
good.
see.
I don't know that it stays up there. First season's good, though.
Yeah, we'll see. So anyway, everybody have a great, safe, awesome rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon.